Chapter 195. For a moment, Roland wondered if he had misheard. What? Scroll bit her lip and repeated it again. This time he was sure that he hadn't misheard. Would a witch care so much about his marriage? Are you sure that witches can't have children? Is it because, for some reason, it led to a wrong understanding? For example, the holy mountain. I also hope so, she sighed. Unfortunately, many examples have confirmed this point. Whether it was with ordinary people or forced, there were no examples of witches giving birth. The Witch Cooperation Association didn't have any, and the other witch organizations also didn't hear of it. Reproductive isolation, such a word emerged in Roland's mind. Have witches really completely surpassed ordinary people and become a new human being, so that they can't conceive offspring with the old human beings? Or is it because of the magic power gathering in the body, leading to this phenomenon? But now is not the time to get to the bottom of it, he thought, the key lies in its influence. Would this be a hindrance to his idea of marrying a witch? The first thing that came to Roland's mind was Anna. Although it was a pity that he couldn't have children with Anna, but the premise of him liking children was based on his love for Anna, not having children would not reduce this love. Moreover, for him, who had a modern soul, the relationship between him and his descendants was far less important than the ancient emphasis on blood inheritance. As a separate individual, he didn't see his children as an extension of himself. The latter could neither inherit thoughts nor memories, but was an independent person. Therefore, from an emotional point of view, he could completely accept the fact that witches couldn't have children. Then there was only one obstacle left, the problem of an heir. However, this wasn't a difficult task for me, who had studied the long river of history. All I had to do was establish an empire that didn't need an heir. There were many ways to implement this, and I could slowly consider it later. Overall, Roland was surprised to find that this was actually a major piece of good news. How to build a social framework in which new human witches and ordinary people could live in peace and progress together was a problem that he had been thinking about since the night talk with Nightingale. But he found that even with the suppression of the God's Stone of Retaliation, as long as enough time passed, the witches and their descendants would always form a stronger group. Even if the technology developed to the point where ordinary people could also use magic, it still couldn't make up for the witches' overall superiority in intelligence, memory, and thinking speed. And now he was told that witches were infertile. This, to a great extent, prevented the formation of family groups and weakened the gap between the witches and ordinary people. At the same time, he saw the hope of the two working together. Perhaps because he had been thinking for too long, Nightingale couldn't help but grab his arm. Roland snapped out of his thoughts and patted the back of her hand comfortingly. He cleared his throat and said, "That's what I thought before, and I still think so." Scroll was stunned for a moment. What? The hand on her arm instantly tightened. Roland couldn't help but laugh out loud. Previously, he had doubted whether he had heard wrongly. Was it the other party's turn now? He coughed twice and said again, "Now I still think so, I am willing to marry a witch." When Scroll left, her expression was very strange. She seemed to be satisfied, but also slightly sad, which made Roland confused. He could only ask Nightingale, who was beside him, "Is she okay?" The latter didn't answer, but looked at Roland with a smile. The sunlight outside the window shone on her white face and soft hair, bright and beautiful. "Well," Roland looked away, "I'll take it that you're in a good mood." At this moment, there was a knock on the office door. "Your Highness, a knight has come to Longsong Stronghold. He said he has information to give you. Take him to the reception room, I'll be there later." When the prince entered the hall, the knight immediately stepped forward, knelt on one knee and said, "Sir Perrault asked me to tell you that Timothy Wimbledon has sent an emissary group. They have already arrived at Longsong Stronghold." "An emissary group?" Roland muttered, "How many people have come?" "A total of about 50 people." That seems to be a persuasion team, he thought. If it's just a diplomatic means, it won't hurt me at all. When did they arrive? "Yesterday morning," the knight said in a deep voice. "Sir Perrault asked me to hurry up and inform you of the news as soon as possible." It only took them one day. I'm afraid they were carrying torches all night. You've worked hard, take a good rest for a day and then return. Roland looked at the guard and said, reward him with a golden dragon, and take him to the hotel. After the knight left, Roland wanted to put this matter aside. After all, a team of 50 people was no threat to Border Town, and if it was only for negotiation, he could just let the leader come in. But thinking that Perrault was so cautious, it was better to know the whereabouts of the emissary group. Thinking of this, he called Lightning and Maggie, and let them fly to Longsong's stronghold one after the other to check the situation. After an hour, the two witches finished their investigation and returned to the castle. There's nothing, Lightning reported. I haven't seen a team of 50 knight on the road, I haven't even seen a single knight. I haven't seen a single one, Coo. Maggie confirmed. It seems that after their long and arduous journey to the big city, they need to find some fun to relieve their tired bodies. Roland felt relieved. Before the arrival of the emissary group, you will scout along the road once a day. He paused. By the way, how's the progress of the map you drew? I've put together hundreds of maps, almost enough to fill Soroya's room, Lightning said. She has now moved the map to the backyard. Do you want to see it? Okay, Roland said with a smile. The backyard of the castle had been turned into a botanical garden, and since Sean had brought back the crop seeds from the port of Clearwater, the things planted here had become even more bizarre. Moreover, in order to save land and flower beds, Leaf had put up a wooden shelf in the air, so that many plants, like grapevines, could wrap around the shelf and grow, and even climb up half of the castle wall. Now, the wall behind the castle was hung with grapes, apples, wheat and sugar cane. When the witches had nothing to do, they would gather in the backyard and eat some fruits and sugar cane from the wall. Unfortunately, these crops could only be grown under the influence of Leaf's magic, so they could only be regarded as incomplete experimental products. The map was placed in the middle of the courtyard. It was 5 or 6 square meters, and was made up of pieces of parchment. We're here. Lightning put one hand around Roland's waist and slowly floated him up, floating in the air above the map. Do you see the palm-sized grayish-brown square? From the air, Border Town looks like this. The east and south are blue. Are they the sea? Yes, but we have to cross over a mountain ridge to get there. Roland's heart slightly shivered. If it was said that the barbarian land was 10 times wider than Grey Castle, then it would be normal, but he didn't expect that when the complete map was presented in front of him, the Western Territory would actually seem so small. In front of them was the impassable mountain range, behind was the sea. It was simply like a border area sandwiched between natural strongholds. No, not only the Western Territory. He filled in the missing parts of the map in his mind. If the impassable mountain range that divided the mainland was a wall, then Grey Castle, and even the entire mainland, would only be a small piece of land behind the wall. Chapter 196. Lehman and his party rode their horses through the streets of Longsong stronghold. After the battle, the residents of the city hid in their homes, closing their doors and not going out. Not a single person could be seen on the streets. It seemed somewhat deserted. Sir Lehman, is your hand okay? Shield Knight Levin asked. It's not a big problem, Lehman shrugged, at least I can still move. But this action made him frown. Last night's battle to seize the gate had gone very smoothly. There were only 20 guards guarding the east gate, and they had never thought that the enemy would attack from inside the city. Although the horn had been blown, it would take at least a quarter of an hour for the reinforcements to arrive. 15 mercenaries took the pills and rushed to the top of the wall, killing the guards one by one, while Lehman led the knight to open the gate. In the darkness, he didn't notice that there was a side door on the wall, from which 2 guards suddenly rushed out, one of them holding a hammer and rushed towards him. In order to make it easier to turn the capstan, he had already put his weapon into his waist, so in a hurry, Lehman had to use his arm to block. Almost at the same time, Levin on the other side thrust his sword straight into the guard's waist. Affected by this fatal blow, the hammer's power was reduced by more than half, but it still left a dent on his arm. At that time, Lehman didn't feel much pain, but after seizing the city gate, he found that it was difficult to lift his right arm. Undoing the armor, he saw that his forearm was swollen like a rolling pin. I hope the church has some pain-relieving herbs, Levin said. They often prepare some strange things. For example, meatballs. The other night, Dorn said with a grin. Of the 13 nights' night attack, 2 were lost, and 1 was seriously injured, now lying in the camp moaning. It was estimated that he wouldn't survive the night. Overall, such a loss is acceptable, Lehman thought. Now that the militia has entered the city, the stronghold has completely fallen into my hands. Soon, a group of people arrived at the entrance of the church. A group of more than 100 militia members were already waiting for orders. Seeing Lehman, they all showed a look of longing. Give them the pills. Lehman dismounted. Seeing that everyone had received the pills, he led the team up the stairs to the main hall. Stop, the 2 believers guarding the door shouted. You are not allowed to bring weapons into the Holy Land. Levin pulled out his weapon and handed it over with both hands. I know, I'll give it to you, okay? Just as the believer was about to take the sword, he suddenly grabbed the hilt with one hand and flicked it upwards. The believer's hands fell to the ground. Ah! Before the believer could scream in pain, the knight had already pierced his throat with the tip of his sword. Although Levin's nickname was Sturdy Shield, his swift sword was rarely matched. Another believer had his throat slit by Dorn. Lehman kicked the door open and walked into the hall expressionlessly. Who are you people? A middle-aged man in a white priest robe with blue edges stepped forward, fearless in the face of the bloody blade. How dare you break into the church? Children, capture them. Lehman sneered. Most of the townspeople were staying at home, and there were only 20 or 30 believers stationed in the church. In the face of the battle-hardened knight, only death awaited those who resisted. Not waiting for his order, Dorn had already pulled out his sword with a strange smile and cut down a believer who had rushed forward. The others quickly joined the battle, and the church suddenly became a mess. Seeing that the situation was not good, the priest shouted, Children, take the holy medicine, let God give you the power to defeat the thugs. His Majesty Timothy had guessed correctly. Lehman was delighted. There really were pills here. He saw the believers' eyes suddenly become red, and blue veins appeared on their faces. During the period of effect of the medicine, an ordinary person could burst out with strength and speed beyond the limits of the human body, and the narrower the terrain, the more difficult it was to deal with. Unfortunately, you are not the only one who has this kind of thing, he thought. Taste your own strength. Get out of the way, he shouted. Militia, meet the enemy. The militia behind him heard this, and couldn't wait to swallow the double-colored pills, and then began to fight with the believers who had gone berserk. At this time, the priest's face finally changed. Why do you also have holy medicine? Lehman bypassed the 2 groups of people who were fighting, and with a sword in one hand approached the other. This is a gift from the church. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid His Majesty would have already unified Greycastle. His Majesty. The priest's eyes widened. You are Timothy's. His voice stopped abruptly, and the sword in the knight's hand had already pierced his chest, penetrating his heart and lungs. This battle of great disparity in strength quickly ended, and more than 20 believers were slaughtered, their corpses lying disorderly on the ground. After the effect of the medicine subsided, the militia let out heavy breathing sounds, and sat down contentedly against the corpses, not minding the wanton flow of blood in the slightest. Lehman increasingly felt his arm become heavier, and the sword just now made him feel as if he was being torn apart. Sometimes he also wanted to swallow the black pill to make himself ignore the physical exhaustion and pain, but every time he saw the ugly state of those who took the medicine, he withdrew this idea. Regarding the 2 kinds of pills sold by the church, Lehman already had a deep understanding. For a healthy person, the pill could only take effect up to 3 times, the first time about a quarter of an hour, after which the duration would become shorter and shorter, and at the same time, a strong dependence would form. If the medicine was not taken for a long time, the body would gradually decline until death. Taking advantage of this characteristic, he made all the militia take the pills before setting off, forcing them to obey his orders, and the desire for the medicine could also turn the weakest and most incompetent farmer into a bloodthirsty beast. Now, this was the second time these 100 people had taken the pill, and they only had one chance left. However, even if they continued to take the medicine after 3 times, it could only alleviate the pain, and could not reverse the process. In other words, as long as they took the first pill, it was equivalent to already having 1 foot in the coffin. Of course, Lehman would not tell this group of people. There was no doubt that the two-color secret medicine was a conspiracy of the church, and His Majesty Timothy was clearly aware of this, so he forbade any knight to use it. However, it was also a weapon to unify the kingdom, or in other words, a necessity. Without it, His Majesty would not be able to defeat Garcia Wimbledon, who also had the pill. When he first heard His Majesty mention this matter, Lehman still couldn't believe it. He really couldn't understand why the church would support 2 royal bloodlines to compete for the throne, but a series of subsequent changes made him increasingly agree with His Majesty's judgment, and now that he had also seen the pills in the Church of the Western Territory, he no longer had any doubts. The church did not intend to help any prince ascend the throne. What they wanted was the entire Grey Castle. I found the pills in the basement. 4 big boxes, there are several thousand pills. After thoroughly searching the church, Levin excitedly reported, there are also a lot of golden dragon, jewelry and silk, which should have been donated by the believers. Take away everything that can be taken away, and burn everything that can't be taken away, Lehman ordered. In any case, this is all done by Roland Wimbledon, we are only helping the church suppress the rebellion. Since the secret medicine had to be provided by the church, now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. Pushing the blame to the 4th prince would be considered as a dead man with no evidence. In order not to arouse the church's suspicion, His Majesty himself stayed in the north, pretending to listen to the other side's instructions, but sent himself with a small number of knights to recruit a large number of militias to seize the Western Territory. Now that the church's forces were all concentrated in the kingdom of Wolfheart, they had no time to pay attention to the situation here, so it was necessary to unify Grey Castle as soon as possible, so that they could spare some strength to resist the church's attack. His Majesty Timothy believed that sooner or later, they would attack Grey Castle, so before that, it was necessary to store and collect as many pills as possible. At the same time, he also ordered King's City Alchemist Workshop to study the ingredients of the secret medicine, striving to be able to imitate it as soon as possible. Chapter 197. The next morning, Roland learned that a large group of soldiers and horses were approaching. Lightning discovered the slow-moving troops during her routine patrol. What, more than 1,000 people? Roland was startled. Wasn't it supposed to be a delegation of 50 people? Aha, Maggie added, but not many of them, only 6. What about the people on foot? What about their clothes and weapons? Ordinary, most of them don't have any armor, just ordinary linen clothes, Lightning said. They also have a variety of weapons, but several hundred of them carry a short spear on their back. With such poor equipment, are they forced to recruit civilians or serfs? Roland wondered. In this era, there was no special training for the militia. To put it bluntly, the militia was responsible for carrying food and supplies for the knight's army, and sometimes served as cannon fodder to consume the enemy's arrows. If Timothy wanted to kill him by force, it was impossible for him not to know about the battle between Longsong's stronghold and border town. More than 200 knights of the Duke of Ryan's coalition army had not been able to touch the border of Border Town, let alone this group of militia running on foot. Knowing the course of the battle and the result, they still marched to Border Town, which could only mean that they had the confidence to break through the dense line of guns. Roland could not help but think of the church's pills. Before, he had speculated whether the church was supporting him and Garcia, and whether they were also supporting Timothy. If these people all had pills, the situation would be completely different. In a short period of time, a human could run at a speed close to that of a horse without fear of pain. In other words, the line of guns would face the attack of more than 1,000 knights. As long as one of them rushed into the line, the First Army would suffer casualties. Fortunately, the current First Army was no longer the army it had been 2 months ago. Although the revolving rifles had only been replaced with 100 or so rifles, the firepower they could deliver far exceeded that of the flintlock unit. Especially after the shooters were equipped with specialized reloaders, the enemies within a range of 300 meters would be met with continuous attacks. The artillery team had also been expanded after the Battle of the Stronghold, from the original 4 teams to the current 20 teams. Each team was equipped with a modified 12-pounder field cannon, which had increased the effective range to more than a kilometer. However, Roland thought of another problem. Did you notice that those people on foot are wearing God's stones of retaliation? I didn't dare to get too close, Lightning said, pointing to Maggie. This guy can see much better than me after turning into an eagle. The latter shook his head and said, I didn't see it. Maybe it's hidden in my clothes, coo. If that's the case. Roland pondered. Why don't you take Nightingale and fly again? With only one person on its back, it should be able to fly at a height of about 10 meters, right? You just fly along the Redwater River. Maggie will be responsible for guarding the front. If you encounter any passing ships, use Nightingale to enter the fog state. He looked at Nightingale and said, when you get close to the enemy, you observe them from a distance to see if anyone is carrying a God's stone of retaliation. Do not attack without permission. Yes. Nightingale and Lightning said in unison. Just as the 3 of them were ready to set off, Roland stopped them. Remember, safety is the most important thing. Protect yourself. No problem, Nightingale winked and said with a smile. After the witches had left, he felt a little uneasy. Wasn't that last sentence too much like raising a flag? Moreover, he also realized that he had made a major mistake in his work. That was, his control of Longsong Stronghold's intelligence was too weak. If it wasn't for Perot's messenger, he would have likely encountered the enemy only when they reached the door. Once they were caught in a street fight, it would be difficult for the First Army to reverse the situation after losing their firepower advantage. I'm still too young and too simple, Roland thought. I have to make up for this after the war. Moreover, it's not just intelligence, I should also place my own people around Perot. The prince sat restlessly at the table, not in the mood to eat lunch. Only when Lightning flew into the room like a fairy with Nightingale on her back, did he breathe a sigh of relief. Maggie flapped her wings and landed on Nightingale's shoulder, shouting, no coup, no coup. No God's stone of retaliation. Most of them don't have any. Nightingale took off her hood, revealing her blonde hair. I observed from the front to the back, except for the 10 people leading the militia, there were only 3 or 4 black holes. Very good, Roland immediately formed a preliminary battle plan in his mind. Are you all hungry? Let's go to the dining room first, tell the chef what you want to eat. Honey barbecue coup. Maggie spread her wings and raised her head. Outside the east side of the town. Van glanced at the busy stonemasons and workers on both sides of the road. What are they building? Hundreds of people first dug several large pits in the ground, and then built brick walls around the pits. He had thought that these walls would be connected to block the road, but he didn't expect that they were built around the pits. Who cares, I only know that there are enemies to beat, Job said excitedly while fixing the gun carriage in place. Indeed, Van thought. Since the last time they defeated the Duke's coalition, His Royal Highness had personally awarded each member of the artillery team a bronze badge, no, a medal. The front of the medal had the symbol of Longsong Stronghold's high wall, and the back was engraved with the year and military achievements. It was made very beautifully, which made the firearms team extremely envious. Moreover, in addition to this honor, everyone was promoted 1 level. Now Van was the captain of the artillery team, in charge of 10 artillery teams. The Rodney brothers, Cat's Claw and Jop, were promoted to team leaders. 3 of them were transferred to the newly established group to teach the new recruits how to operate the artillery. The most exciting thing was that His Royal Highness had fulfilled his promise. On the east side of the town, at the foot of the impassable mountain range, Van was given a piece of land. Although it was still only a forest, a stone tablet had been erected on the ground, symbolizing that the right to use this land belonged to him. So when they learned that the enemy wanted to invade the town, the First Army suddenly became excited. Everyone was eager to fight, hoping to make a contribution in this battle. When dusk fell, Van who had finished the day's practice, wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned against the gun carriage to take a break. For the whole afternoon, he had been checking whether the recruits had followed the rules and procedures to fire the artillery, shouting until his throat was almost smoking. "Drink some water," Job handed over a leather bag. "Thank you." Van unscrewed the lid and drank it in one gulp. "I think I know what they want to build," Job said proudly, curling up the corner of his mouth. "Really?" He returned the leather bag to Job. At this time, the brick wall had been built to half a person's height, roughly forming a hexagon around the pit. However, on each side of the wall, 30 or 40 centimeters from the ground, there was a narrow horizontal gap, a bit like a window, but slightly narrower. "It can't be a house, right?" Chapter 198. 3 days passed by quickly, and the defensive line was basically completed. Roland stood on the high platform behind the position, just like during the months of demons against the demonic beasts. He personally came to the battlefield to encourage all the officers and soldiers of the First Army. Because Nightingale had a special mission, she had already sneaked into the battlefield with Echo, and the witch who had taken over his protection duty was Anna. Roland himself had also put on a coated armor, with 2 revolvers at his waist. If the defensive line hadn't completely collapsed, it would have been very difficult for the fish that escaped the net to pose a threat to him. "The enemy is about 10 kilometers away from here, coo." A huge pigeon descended from the sky and landed on his shoulder. "Good job, continue to monitor them." Roland took out a piece of beef jerky from his pocket and handed it to Maggie. She pecked the jerky open and swallowed it, then spread her wings and flew towards the east. With Lightning and Maggie taking turns to scout, he was very clear about the enemy's movements, so he could calmly arrange the battlefield. In order to deal with the berserker warriors who had taken drugs, it was not safe to line up in a long and thin battle line. In particular, according to Lightning's report, he was particularly concerned about the hundreds of people carrying short spears on their backs. If he had not guessed wrong, it was very likely that the other side had used them as a preemptive weapon. Generally, the range of a thrown weapon wouldn't exceed 50 meters, but that was only for ordinary people. After taking the pills, how far the militia could throw their short spears, Roland wasn't clear, but once it exceeded 100 meters, it would become a threat to the firearms team. So he simply chose to put down a batch of bunkers, implement urban tactics, use buildings to block the entrance, guns to block the road, and artillery to suppress the enemy, building an insurmountable line of defense. With enough cement, it was easier to quickly build a bunker than a city wall. Although the single-layer brick bunker seemed a bit fragile in structure, for the militia who didn't carry heavy siege weapons, it was already an indestructible fortification. 10 bunkers were arranged in a diamond shape on both sides of the road, forming a crossfire. Each bunker was equipped with 24 soldiers, half of them were recruits and half of them were veterans. The skilled veterans were responsible for shooting, while the recruits were responsible for loading the ammunition. Soroya had also drawn optical camouflage on the bunker. Looking at it from a distance, the bunker and the surrounding environment were almost integrated into one, and it was difficult to tell the difference between the two. Behind the battle line was the artillery unit. The 20 cannons were lined up in a row, and the firing sequence was the same as before. They adjusted the firing angle and loaded the corresponding ammunition according to Lightning's instructions. There was also an emergency force standing around the artillery position. There were about 100 of them, equipped with flintlocks, to protect the artillery and His Highness in the rear. Looking at the spirited and high-spirited soldiers in the defense line, Roland felt a little emotional. At first, they were thin and weak, and had signed up to join the army for eggs. But after the baptism of the months of demons and the defense of the town, they were now able to shoulder the heavy responsibility of defending their homes. "Your Highness, the enemy is only 2 kilometers away from us." This time, it was the little girl Lightning who flew back to report. "Very good. Leave the surveillance task to Maggie. You can go into the forest and issue the signal to fire." Roland nodded, then turned around and said to the chief knight, "Pass my order, all members of the First Army, get into position and prepare to meet the enemy." "Yes." Carter saluted. Lehman felt that his hand was getting heavier and heavier. 2 days ago, there was still a burning pain, but now he had almost lost consciousness. The armor could no longer cover his swollen and blue arm, and the place where the hammer had hit left a red and black mark. At first glance, the skin looked like it was covered with a layer of oil, somewhat transparent and shiny. It should be a broken bone, he thought. If I don't treat it, I won't be able to keep my arm. Although the painkillers found in the church could relieve the pain, they couldn't make the broken bone grow back. He decided to wait until the end of the battle and immediately return to King's City, where Greycastle's best pharmacists and alchemists should be able to cure this damn internal injury. Sir Lehman, your hand, is it okay? Levin asked with some concern. It only looks scary, he pretended to be indifferent. Besides, we don't need to attack Border Town, we just need to watch from the side. I hope the pain in your arm hasn't made you dizzy, sir, Dorn sneered. Have you thought about how to attack Border Town? The other's tone made Lehman frown, but now was not the time to care about such trivial things. According to the information I heard from the wolf and elk nobles, they mainly rely on a long-range attack weapon to contain the knight's charge. This weapon can launch an attack before the knight can accelerate, accompanied by fire and a loud noise, similar to a large ballista, but the projectile it shoots is much faster than the ballista. In other words, although it is powerful, it can't be fired continuously, right? Levin quickly grasped the key point. Yes, the faster we approach the enemy's line of defense, the less attacks we will receive, Lehman nodded. In addition, the number of people is also very important. As far as I know, the Duke of Ryan's Knight Regiment and the Noble's Knight Regiment add up to no more than 200 people, and in the end they are only one step away from breaking through the line of defense, while we have no less than 1,500 people. After taking the medicine, these idiots can run no slower than horses, so the result will be completely different from the last time. Or all of this will not happen at all, Dorn said disapprovingly. Roland Wimbledon may still be waiting for the emissary group to visit him in the castle, we just have to walk into the castle and cut off his head. No, he must have already noticed us, Lehman said decisively. Haven't you noticed that in the past 3 days we haven't met any caravans? It's not strange for the merchants who set off from Longsong's stronghold to stop or return after seeing the tail of the main army, but not seeing any caravans from Border Town is unusual. This can only mean that the prince has sealed off the border. Now do you understand why His Majesty chose Sir Lehman as the captain, and not you? Levin sneered. Well, it seems that there is no problem with your head for the time being, Dorn shrugged. This is also good. Compared to killing the prince, it is obviously more interesting to get rid of those untouchables who dare to rebel against His Majesty. Sir Lehman, Border Town's troops and horses have been discovered in front, the knight in charge of the investigation reported. Let's go and have a look, Lehman urged his mount forward. At this time, the outline of the town's castle was faintly visible, and at the end of the road there seemed to be a shadow walking. He took out his telescope and carefully observed the enemy's line of defense. Those wheeled things should be the long-range attack weapons mentioned in the intelligence, but their number seems to be much greater. Should we let everyone directly rush forward? Levin asked. This road is a bit narrow, I'm afraid it won't be able to accommodate all the militia. He looked to the right side of the woods. We can divide some people and go around the woods, it doesn't matter if it's slow. If we can form a pincer attack from the side, this line of defense won't last long. Just as Lehman was about to order the adjustment of the team, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a white figure from the corner of his eye. He was startled. Is this an illusion caused by the broken arm? Turning his head, he saw that it was actually a woman. She was wearing a hood, her whole body was shrouded in a white robe, and before he had time to open his mouth, a flame suddenly appeared in her hand. Chapter 199. Everyone charge. Almost at the same time, Lehman's voice rang out. Levin stared blankly at Lehman Hawes, who had fallen from his horse. The back half of his head had completely exploded, revealing a red and white slime. The broken helmet had fallen to the side, the top of which had a large hole, seemingly unable to provide any protection. Charge, everyone charge. Then Levin's voice also rang out. No, I didn't even speak. Levin covered his mouth and looked behind him. The militiamen had already swallowed their pills and began to run, as if a wall of people were rushing towards him. It's the witch, he realized. The witch had imitated his voice. Don't rush, stop, he shouted. However, this voice was like a small splash in the midst of the surging crowd. Some people stopped when they heard his order, but even more people continued to charge forward. Quick, rush, break through the enemy's line of defense, the town will be yours to plunder. Not only his voice, but Dorn and the other knights' voices rang out at the same time. Moreover, their voices drowned out all the noise, as if they were directly roaring in their ears. Bursts of shouts also broke out from the ranks, as if in coordination with this order. The crowd began to shout the slogan, "Plunder," one after another, not knowing who started it, but it soon resounded throughout the entire army. The situation was completely out of control. No matter how much Levin shouted, it was all drowned out by the excited roars of the crowd. He had to control his horse with all his strength, in order to prevent himself from being carried away by the torrent of people. The militiamen seemed to have lost their minds, rushing towards the center of the road. No, that's not right. They didn't have any sense of reason, especially under the guidance of someone. After taking the medicine they would enter a state of extreme excitement, and any slaughter would only stimulate them further. At first, some people avoided Lehman who had fallen to the ground, but later on, the crowd directly stepped over his body. Levin wanted to look for Dorn and the others, but found that they had been scattered by the flow of people, so he had no choice but to follow the direction of the troops, gradually moving towards the side of the woods. If he suddenly moved his horse horizontally, it was likely that he would be knocked down by the militiamen who had increased their strength by several times. At that time it would be difficult for him to stand up again. After separating from the troops, Levin looked around, wanting to find the witch who had created this chaos and dismember her body into 10,000 pieces. In his opinion, this was definitely a witch's plot. The 1,500 people who had taken the pill rushed towards the town's defensive line like a swarm of bees. For the prince, this was also a wave of fatal attacks. Even if the enemy had a large number of new weapons, they would not be able to withstand so many people, and the final result would definitely not be good. In a situation where both sides suffered losses, the witches were obviously happy to see such a situation, so they played tricks and lured the army to advance without authorization. The witch who killed Lehman and created the chaos shouldn't be the same person. Roland looked at the small number of militias around him. They were all standing at the front of the army and had witnessed Lehman's fall, as well as the group of people who had heard his order to stop. However, compared to the huge army, there were less than 30 people gradually approaching them. One of them should have the ability to hide their body, and the other one should have the ability to simulate sound. It's impossible for a witch to have two abilities. Go find the latter. I want to tear her throat with my own hands. From the shooting window, Brian could see that the enemy was getting closer and closer. The bunker in front of them was already firing. His position was located in the middle of the diamond, so he had to wait for the enemy to pass by the purple marking on the side of the road before he could open fire. This kind of waiting made him very anxious. Walking to the other side of the window, Brian looked back into the distance. White smoke was constantly rising from the artillery position, and a loud sound like rolling thunder could be heard. They were the first to get busy. The range of the 12-pound cannons covered almost the entire battlefield, and if you listened carefully, you could even hear the whistling sound of the shells passing through the air. My God, they're really fast. Look at that guy, his hand was cut off by a shell, but he's still running forward. His Royal Highness is right, are they still human? They're just like demonic beasts. Since the First Army had been informed before the war that the enemy was a madman who had taken the church's berserk pill, the enemy's charge against the rain of bullets not only didn't scare them, but instead made them full of fighting spirit. After all, the First Army had grown up fighting against demonic beasts. Captain, they're almost here. Someone reminded him. Brian quickly returned to his position and put the rifle out of the window. Compared to the original flintlock that needed to be reloaded once, the new weapon issued by His Royal Highness was simply a qualitative improvement. He could fire 5 bullets in one go, and then throw the cartridge to the recruits behind him, and then fire the 5 spare bullets. By this time, the recruits should have already reloaded their bullets. However, His Royal Highness had emphasized during training that only when the enemy was within 100 to 50 meters of them could they use this method to suppress the enemy. When shooting from a distance, it was necessary to improve the accuracy as much as possible, because the bullets for a revolving rifle were very troublesome to make, and each person had a limited amount of them. Brian deeply believed that the gunpowder-filled copper shells were thin at the front and thick at the back, and almost every one of them was the same. A blacksmith would never be able to make such an exquisite thing, so he knew that it must have come from the hands of a witch. Usually, everyone would collect the bullet shells and hand them over to Iron Axe, and after the shooting training, they would inevitably have to practice reloading. A group of people sat in the center of the camp, and in accordance with the operating rules, they would put the primer, gunpowder, and warhead into the distributed bullet shells, and then assemble new bullets. Because of this, he was reluctant to indiscriminately consume the ammunition on targets that were difficult to hit. When the enemy crossed the purple mark, Brian took a deep breath and shouted, "Fire freely." The soldiers had been waiting for this order for a long time, and they couldn't wait to pull the trigger on the target they had already aimed at. For a moment, the bunker was filled with the sound of gunfire. The first enemy to cross the line of fire was hit by the crisscrossed bullets from both sides, blood blossomed from his waist, and he staggered 2 steps before falling to the ground. Obviously, they could withstand more pain than ordinary people, but in the face of large-caliber bullets, it was still of no use. Brian noticed that several people had jumped to the top of the bunker in the front row, wanting to sneak attack the soldiers fighting inside from behind, but a thick iron gate blocked them outside. Without hesitation, he turned the muzzle of the gun and killed these fanatics who had exposed themselves one by one. The reason why the bunkers were arranged in a rhombus shape was that they could cover each other, and if the enemy tried to circle behind them, they would be strangled by the firepower of the bunker behind them. "Be careful, they're throwing spears." Suddenly someone shouted. Brian saw a dense black shadow jump out from the middle of the enemy's main force, and after crossing the highest point in the air, it fell towards the bunkers on both sides. This distance, it was probably 200 or 300 meters. He subconsciously shrank his head closer to the pit, only to hear a series of crackling sounds above his head. After this wave of attack, he stood up straight and found that not a single spear had been thrown into the bunker. The situation in the bunker in front was similar, only a few short spears were stuck in the wall, like lonely feathers. "It looks scary, but it's useless," the crowd laughed. At this moment, Brian saw an enemy braving a series of sputtering dust to approach the bunker where he was located. He bent down and threw the short spear in his hand horizontally. The moment the weapon left his hand, he was also knocked down by a dense rain of bullets. Chapter 200. Freckles. Someone shouted, "He's injured." "Don't move him." Brian roared, "I'll check his injury, you continue to shoot." He handed the rifle to the recruit behind him, who was responsible for loading, and bent over to the other side. The wounded was still conscious. He trembled and asked, "Captain, will I die?" The short spear had stabbed into the lower part of his chest, but it was not clear whether it had penetrated or not. Seeing that his breathing was still smooth, it should not have injured his lungs. During the cultural class, His Royal Highness had briefly explained the role of the various organs of the human body, as well as the emergency measures in case of injury. In this case, the best way he could think of was to leave him alone and wait until the end of the battle for Miss Nana to treat him. "Does it hurt?" Brian asked. Freckles nodded with difficulty. "If you can feel pain, it means you won't die." The knight put his hand on his forehead. "You should know Miss Nana's ability, right?" "Yes," Freckles reluctantly revealed a smile. "Everyone usually wants to see her, so I can also see her." "Yes, so you have to hold on." After Blair finished speaking, he returned to the front of the shooting window. The recruit looked back worriedly. "Don't you need to pull out the spear?" "If you pull it out, it will easily cause a lot of bleeding. When you learn this, you will naturally understand." He paused. "What we can do now is to defeat the enemy as soon as possible." Standing on the high platform, Roland could clearly see the enemy rushing towards the town like a tide. Every time they crossed a row of bunkers, their speed would slow down a lot. When they crossed the third row of bunkers, the enemy's flanks were completely exposed to the crossfire of the archers. Echo's role was very obvious. Although the team was stretched into a long line, most of the people still followed the witch's continuous command to charge, running on the main road. Groups of people were falling at every moment, and they were helpless to do anything about it. Facing a fortification that couldn't be destroyed by swords and spears, Timothy's militia troops could only endure the casualties and continue to move forward. 300 meters behind the third row of bunkers was the artillery position, and within this distance, it was a dead zone covered by canister shells. In the sky, lightning had changed her flag to a bright red one. The firing angles of the 20 cannons were leveled, spewing flames and smoke in front of them. Roland roughly estimated that the cannons with the most proficient movements could fire a canister in 20 seconds, and the slower ones could fire in about half a minute. At first glance, it seemed to be close to the rate of fire of the excellent cannoneers during the American Civil War, but the latter's 3 shots per minute performance was the performance of firing solid shells, and a lot of time was spent on resetting the cannons and repeatedly aiming. There was no need to aim or clean the barrel when firing the canister, and the firing speed could be raised even higher. But for the enemy, this was already a terrifying rate of fire. The canister bullets were particularly lethal to unarmored targets. Almost every iron ball could penetrate 2 or 3 people. Although the pills could resist pain, they could not suppress fear. When they saw the people around them being turned into sieves, even if they were filled with excitement and the desire to kill, they could no longer suppress the instinctive fear of life. Not to mention that they weren't some iron-willed troop to begin with. Without the pills, these people were just a group of untrained civilians who lacked actual combat experience. When half of the people were lying on the road, the enemy began to flee. Fear spread like a plague. With the first one, soon a second and a third appeared. The front line completely stopped moving forward and began to change direction, retreating towards the rear. The artillery team once again replaced the solid shells and fired at the center of the road, while the flintlock team in the bunker never stopped firing. Piles of corpses fell on the road. Levin's anger gradually cooled down, and he began to feel afraid. More than 20 people first discovered the witch who had created the chaos. She was wearing strange clothes, and when she lurked in the woods, she almost blended in with the surrounding scenery. If the other party hadn't been moving forward with the main force, leading them to the center of the road, it would have been almost impossible for them to discover her. Even so, she caused great trouble for Levin. He discovered that the witch's imitated voice was erratic, and didn't need to come out from the mouth. Sometimes it came from the left, sometimes it came from the right, and sometimes it even came from the back of his head. The content was also varied, such as imitating his own accent to issue orders, or a malicious painful cry for help. But just as they were about to surround and capture her, the woman in white appeared again. Levin relived the shocking scene of Lehman Hus being killed in the blink of an eye. She was holding a silver crossbow in her hand, and as long as there was a burst of sparks and a loud noise, one of them would fall. The encirclement was torn apart in an instant, and for a moment, everyone became frightened. Their armor was unable to resist, and their shields were also of no use. The iron shield in Levin's hand was broken in half, and the small holes in the iron sheet told him how amazing the power of the other party's weapon was. The only thing that could compare to it was the heavy crossbow. If he hadn't subconsciously ducked, it was estimated that he would have already become a corpse. But the heavy crossbow couldn't be fired in succession. The witch in white's ability to disappear and reappear, coupled with the terrifying weapon that didn't need to be loaded, made Levin realize that he had no chance of winning. Once this realization prevailed, his anger was quickly extinguished, as if it had met a cold wind. Take the pill, and take advantage of her appearance to kill her. Although his mouth was shouting like this, Levin himself retreated, and when she focused her attention on the militia, he fiercely ran out of the woods. It would be safer to stay with the large group of people, she would never dare to attack him in the crowd. The growth of the woods was also very strange, the dense weeds almost reached his knees, and the ground was also covered with vines. If he wasn't careful, he would trip. Stumbling all the way out of the woods, Levin looked ahead, wanting to join up with the large group, but the scene in front of him made him dumbfounded. The effect of the pills still hadn't ended, and the militia was retreating. No, it should be said that they were fleeing. Those who were slow to run, or those who hadn't reacted yet, were pushed to the ground and ruthlessly trampled on by the people behind them. Charging like a galloping horse, and running away was the same. The surging tide of people stirred up the dust in the air, and he simply didn't dare to step forward to stop them. What the hell happened? Levin couldn't believe what he was seeing. In such a short period of time, 1,500 people were completely routed? And this was even under the condition of taking the pill. Are the prince's subordinates all monsters? At this moment, the sound of someone stepping on the weeds came from behind him. He clenched his teeth, and fiercely pulled out his sword and stabbed behind him. At this life and death juncture, his sword was even faster than before, like a bolt of lightning, but what greeted him was a dazzling flame. The sword was smashed into pieces by something, sparks flying in all directions, and then a stabbing pain came from his right hand that was holding the sword, and the feeling at his fingertips instantly disappeared. When his line of sight moved to his arm, Levin discovered that half of his arm had disappeared, and his red and white muscles and bones were exposed, like a snake grass flower in full bloom. The woman in white walked towards him with an expressionless face, and he couldn't help but take 2 steps back, and then tripped on the ground. The witch's foot stepped on his shoulder, and the cold weapon was pressed against his forehead. From this angle, Levin could see the other's face hidden under the hood. So beautiful. Chapter 201. Considering the effect of the pills, Roland did not immediately order the First Army to pursue the enemy. Instead, he sent Lightning and Maggie to monitor the enemy's situation. The wounded soldiers on the defensive line were immediately treated. During the whole battle, only 5 people were injured, and all of them were hit by spears. 4 of them were from the artillery team. To his relief, the wave of spears thrown by the enemy did not cause the artillerymen to scatter. Instead, they crouched down and used the gun carriage to dodge the short spears. Then, they rejoined the battle in the shortest time possible. Nana stayed behind the defensive line and waited for orders, especially when the enemy turned around and fled. Ignoring the rumbling sound of gunfire, she ran to the artillery position with Viscount Tigu and treated the wounded soldiers who were stabbed by the spears. It was hard to imagine that half a year ago, she was a little girl who would feel dizzy at the sight of blood. In the end, all 5 of them survived. In the midst of cheers, many soldiers saluted her and watched her leave the battlefield. In fact, this battle was much easier than the one against the Duke's coalition army. Without the drugs, the militias who had fallen into a state of addiction were extremely weak. Some of them even ran for 2 or 3 kilometers before lying on the ground, unwilling to move again. The pursuing troops quickly gathered all of them and escorted them to Longsong's stronghold. During this period, the First Army also captured 2 night soldiers. Although they did not take the pills, they had already lost the will to resist. Facing the constantly approaching troops, they simply chose to surrender and asked to write a letter to their families in order to get a chance to redeem them. 4 days later, they arrived at Longsong's stronghold. According to the information obtained from the interrogation of the surrendered knight, Nightingale easily disintegrated the troops guarding the stronghold castle. The captain was killed on the spot, and more than 100 militias panicked and scattered, then fell into the ambush circle set by the First Army at the gate. Roland's men found Perrault imprisoned in the castle dungeon. He looked a little haggard, probably because of worry and anxiety, but in view of the noble status of the Earl of Honeysuckle, he did not suffer any inhuman treatment. After nearly 3 months, the prince met the agent again. "Your Highness, it's great to be able to see you." Perrault's uneasy mood finally relaxed, and he told him everything he had experienced these past few days in detail. "I don't know about Timothy's messengers, they're all dead," Roland said casually as he leaned back in his chair. In addition, more than half of the 1,500 people they brought with them died at the border of Border Town. The rest are currently locked up in the fortress prison. Perrault was a little surprised when he heard the news that the emissary delegation had been annihilated. Your Highness, if you do this, I'm afraid the new king, no, your brother will see you as a thorn in his side. So, I should just surrender and obediently return to the capital, allowing him to do whatever he wants. Roland stared straight into the man's eyes. The latter could not help but lower his head. No, Your Highness, from the moment he sent his troops to the Western Territory, he was already my enemy, the prince said calmly. In order to seize power, Timothy Wimbledon will only act more and more urgently. He urgently needs land and titles to be distributed to the nobles who support him. If you only want to enjoy yourself, why do you need to manage this fortress on my behalf? You should be very clear that only when I become the king of Greycastle, can your position in the Western Territory be stabilized. He paused, and then said, in order to prevent such a situation from happening again, I need to form an army to defend the fortress. An army? Perrault was startled. Yes, not a knight, but a professional army composed of civilians. Roland slowly explained his plan. You will select a team of 300 people from the fortress, and my subordinates will train them on how to fight. The requirements for these 300 people are, they must be civilians, have never committed a crime, are not believers of the church, be between 16 and 30 years old, and have no physical disabilities. During the training period, they will live in Border Town, and I will provide them with weapons. From now on, your knight and patrol will only be responsible for the city's security. More details are written here. He handed the other a piece of parchment. You can announce the recruitment and screening according to the content. If he wanted to control the city's defense in his own hands, obviously stationing his own army was the most appropriate way. But the number of the first army was too small, and it was not enough to defend Border Town, let alone to be stationed in Longsong Stronghold. Therefore, it was a compromise to let the other provide the manpower, and to train himself. Nightingale's lie detection ability could ensure the purity of the team, and the new army's training methods and ideological education could make this group of people quickly form a fighting force. They would be equipped with the obsolete front-loading flintlock. Even if it was seized by the enemy, it would not be a big problem. In addition, this army could also shoulder the task of transmitting information and intelligence. As long as someone tried to attack the fortress, Roland would be the first to receive the news. I understand. Perrault nodded. I will review the people you have screened out. Don't try to plant spies in the team, it is meaningless. Roland warned, the spies you sent before have now entered the mine. If something similar happens again. No, Your Highness. The other wiped the sweat from his forehead. I promise it won't happen again. Next is the church. The prince leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. You probably don't know yet, but the stronghold cathedral was set on fire by Timothy's men, and the high priest Tyro was also killed by them. Now there are only ruins left. They actually burned down the church. Perrault was shocked by the news. I have to report to Hermes. The church's law stipulated that the king and the lord had the obligation to protect the local church's facilities from being violated. If they were unable to stop it, they should immediately report the news to the Holy City. For the former ambassador who was proficient in the law, this was considered a normal reaction. Moreover, this kind of thing could not be concealed. Perhaps the devout believers in Stronghold had already sent the secret letter to the Holy City on the same day. Indeed, you should report it, but the content of the letter needs to be adjusted appropriately. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. You only need to say in the letter that the attackers were Timothy Wimbledon's troops. After looting and burning the church, they left Longsong Stronghold and disappeared. In addition, you need to attach this thing to the letter. He took out a pill from his pocket and handed it to Perrault. Just say that it was picked up near the church. They will naturally understand. What is this? The church's secret medicine, which is also Timothy's goal. It can make ordinary people burst with extraordinary power for a short period of time, but after the effect of the drug subsides, the user will slowly die of exhaustion. Roland simply explained, Timothy wants to rely on this drug to strengthen the army and stabilize his precarious throne. When the church sees this pill, they will naturally understand his intentions. As for whether they will take measures, that is another matter. Chapter 202. Roland took a sip of tea, then said, "In addition, I intend to carry out basic education in Longsong Stronghold. This is also the test to determine whether you can continue to manage Longsong Stronghold." Hearing the word test, Perrault's ears immediately stood up. Basic education? That's right, Roland nodded with a smile. Now that the church had been destroyed and the high priest had been killed, the church's power had been weakened by more than half. It was a good time to fight for the ideological position. He didn't expect to transform all believers into potential qualified workers, he just wanted to further eliminate the influence of the church. If the holy city wanted to encroach on Longsong Stronghold again, Roland had many ways to keep them out, and building a new church was out of the question. Basic education is open to all residents under the age of 40, regardless of gender, including reading and writing, simple calculation, the popularization of natural knowledge and ideological education. Roland waved his hand, suppressing the other's doubts. Rest assured, this cost will be deducted from the tax paid to Border Town. From this month onwards, you only need to pay 20% of the tax, and the remaining 10% will be used as a special education fund. You can recruit several scholars from King's City, or hire local knight squires and fallen nobles, but these people won't cost much money. 10% of the tax is at least close to 1,000 golden dragon, so you have to do much more than that. Perrault thought for a moment, then said, "Your Highness, do you mean to use this money to encourage the residents to receive education?" This guy's reaction was really sharp. Roland laughed. "Yes, except for children, most people have to make a living during the day, so their education should be carried out at night. But after a busy day, it's finally time to rest. No one wants to listen to other people's nagging, not to mention learning to read also needs to use their brains. So you can use some means to entice them to learn, such as providing a dinner with meat, or learning fast can get a monetary reward, and so on. Of course, a bright and spacious classroom is also indispensable." He paused. "In short, you have to do everything possible to spread this work to all residents of Longsong Stronghold. As I said, this is also a test for you. 1 year later, I want the number of people in the stronghold to exceed 50%. "But Your Highness," said Perrault, hesitating. "Neither scholars nor nobles have any experience in teaching people to read, let alone to popularize natural knowledge or to educate them." He read out the difficult words. "In fact, I don't quite understand them myself. If you use these people, I'm afraid you won't be able to achieve the results you want." "I have also considered this point," Roland comforted her. "Don't worry, I will send a group of City Hall officials to assist you in carrying out this matter. At the same time, all the books you need for education will be provided by Border Town. They have a lot of experience, so they can teach and train the people you recruit first before educating the residents. When the time comes, you'll understand after talking to them in detail. They can handle the specific matters. In this way, as long as I want to continue to be in charge of Longsong Stronghold, I will inevitably use this group of people," the prince thought. And through the Ministry of Education's officials, the news of Longsong Stronghold can also be sent back to Border Town in the first place. Seeing that Perrault did not express any objection, Roland began to give his last order. "The third thing, I plan to build a road between Longsong Stronghold and Border Town, so that pedestrians and caravans can travel between the two places." "Your Highness, there is already a road between the two places?" Perrault asked in surprise. "Can a muddy path created by people be considered a road? It is less than 2 meters wide, and when it rains, it will be full of mud, and the road is full of potholes. It is not suitable for carriages to travel at high speed." Roland shook his head. "I want to build a road that can at least accommodate 2 carriages side by side. The road will be flat and straight, and there will be no water when it rains, just like the streets of Border Town." "Do you mean a gravel road?" The acting lord looked a little surprised. "The cost of this kind of road is not low. It requires a stonemason to cut the gravel, and then select the appropriate size of the stones to match together before it can be used." To build a gravel road from Longsong Stronghold to Border Town, it will cost at least 5,000 golden dragons or more. Your Highness, with all due respect, if Longsong Stronghold does not increase taxes, I am afraid that we will not be able to come up with so much money. The stronghold only needs to provide manpower. The prince bluntly said, you will issue a recruitment notice to all the territories in the western region, not only Longsong Stronghold, but also the territories of all the great families. The salary will be 6 silver royals per month, and the construction period will be 1 year. I believe that there should be many people who will apply. For handymen, 6 silver royals is a relatively high salary. Perrault nodded. I do not know how many people you want to recruit. At least 2,000 people, Roland replied. The monthly cost of hiring handymen was not a small amount. In addition to stonemasons and gravel workers, in the eyes of others, it was definitely a high cost. Very few lords were willing to use their own money to build something that seemed to have no return. This could be seen from the other side's expression. However, now that Border Town could sell steam engines, income and expenditure could basically maintain a balance. Roland had never intended to store the golden dragon in the warehouse. As the saying goes, if you want to be rich, you must first build a road. Investing the remaining money in the infrastructure was undoubtedly the best choice. Building a high-quality road connecting Longsong Stronghold and Border Town was of great significance, not only to facilitate the future trade and communication between the two places, but also the prerequisite for the rapid deployment of the army. If the traffic was inconvenient, even if they received the news that Longsong Stronghold had been attacked, they would have to wait for 3 days before rushing over. I am afraid that the enemy's flag would already be flying over the city walls. I understand, Perrault said. For the time being, you have to do so much. I will immediately return to Border Town. Do a good job, Mr. Ambassador, do not let me down again. When Perrault was about to leave, he suddenly remembered something, stopped and asked, Your Royal Highness, what should we do with those people imprisoned in the prison? For the first time, Roland didn't answer so happily. He was silent for a moment before saying, Keep them, they won't live for long. After boarding Little Town, the prince set foot on his way back. You don't seem to be in a good mood. Nightingale appeared, tilted her head and asked, Is it because of those civilians? They were all forced by Timothy, Roland sighed. If they hadn't taken the pill and been manipulated, they wouldn't have become his minions and died in this strange land. It's not your fault. Nightingale reached out and held his arm. Of course not, Roland said without hesitation. If I hadn't been able to stop them, Border Town would have become a victim of Timothy's power. Of course, the church that made the pill is also one of the main culprits. So you will destroy the church, end the dispute, and make people no longer have to kill each other for such senseless reasons, right? Nightingale asked with a smile. Whether it is an ordinary person or a witch, they can all live happily under your rule. Chapter 203. The sea was like the blue earth, only flatter. If Maggie was here, she would definitely be chattering to her about how far they were from the island. But now, she could only hear the sound of the waves hitting the side of the ship. Although it was a bit boring to listen to for a long time, it was a lucky beat for the crew, which meant that today was a good day for sailing. Well, now there's one more, Ashes thought. Footsteps on the old teak planks made a slight squeaking sound. Someone was coming towards her. I didn't expect you to really live on Sleeping Island. A white-haired old man came to her side and put his hands on the railing. Although it looks very big, once the tide rises, most of the land will be submerged by the sea, so it's not suitable for settlement. Why don't you live in Crescent Moon Bay? It's the second largest island in the fjords, and there are still many uninhabited open spaces there. Jack One-Eye was the captain of the Charming Beauty. As his name suggested, he wore an eye patch that completely covered his left eye. He was also one of the few captains who were willing to transport supplies for the witches. Although the people of the fjords didn't hate witches as much as the people of the mainland, they also didn't like to deal with outsiders. Not everyone is willing to deal with witches like you, Ashes smiled. Sleeping Island will indeed be submerged by the sea, but it's precisely because of this that it's still a deserted island, even though it's the third largest island in the fjords. Third in area doesn't equal to third in living area, Captain Jack shrugged. If it can't be lived, then it's meaningless no matter how big it is, such as the Burning Fire Islands. Witches are best at changing nature, she said seriously, not to mention, this island will become our home. As long as we don't have the suppression of the church, we can create a completely different world. Brand new world. She paused for a moment. How long has it been since you've been to Sleeping Island? The captain took off his hat and touched the back of his head. Almost a month. Last time I sent a batch of witches and a warehouse full of pearl rice. To tell you the truth, the appearance of that group of little girls playing on the ship made my crew look silly. You know how difficult it is for young men to drift on the sea, like a volcano ready to erupt at any time. Fortunately, I stopped them. Otherwise, my beloved ship will suffer. Ashes automatically ignored the second half of his words. A month's time is enough for earth-shaking changes to happen, Mr. Captain. I bet that the sleeping island you see this time will be very different from what you remember. Really? Jack whistled. Then I'm looking forward to. Wait, what's that? He leaned over the side of the ship and looked forward. Monkey. Get on the mast, there seems to be something ahead. The sailor called Monkey nimbly climbed to the top of the mast and raised his telescope. Boss, that should be an island. Island? What nonsense are you talking about? The captain took out his compass and looked at it. How can there be any other islands near us besides Sleeping Island? But it's really an island, Chief, I swear. What's the use of swearing? Let me do it. Jack took off his hat. No, Chief, you'd better not come up here. It's very windy here. Monkey observed for a while longer. By the three gods. He cried incredulously. I know, it's Sleeping Island. It's getting taller. When the charming beauty slowly approached the dock of Sleeping Island, the people on the ship could hardly believe their eyes. The towering island was like a small mountain standing above the sea level. The mountain wall was straight and steep, and the distance to the top was at least several feet. It was the first time that Ashes had arrived on this island, so her reaction was much calmer than most people's. In the eyes of Captain Jack, this was a symbol of calm and self-confidence. You win, he sighed. I didn't expect that you would be able to make an island rise. It's no wonder that the lunatics of the church hate witches so much. This is almost comparable to the gods. Uncle Jack, we didn't make the island rise like you said, the little girl standing at the dock to greet them said with a smile. We just built a circle of walls around Sleeping Island. Later you'll know when you go in with us. Then she turned to Ashes, bowed her head and said, You're finally back. Lady Tilly has been talking about you for a long time. Ashes touched her head. No need to be so polite, Molly. I'll have to trouble you to carry the things later. Leave it to me, the little girl said, patting her chest. When the sailors moved the food from the cabin to the dock, Molly summoned her magic servant, a light blue sphere with 2 arms that could change at will. She gathered more than a dozen bags of food into her arms, and then her arms turned into a net, holding the bags firmly and floating in the air. Let's go, she said proudly. Oh, it's really a convenient ability, the captain said, clapping his hands. You see, boys, so many of you can't even compare to a little girl. The dock was built halfway up the island, and the group went up the stairs. When they reached the top of the island, Ashes instantly understood the meaning of building a circle of walls around the island. It wasn't that the island had risen, but that they had raised the outline of the island. The whole Sleeping Island had turned into a basin, surrounded by a thick circle of edge. And this circle of edge was the wall that Molly had mentioned. Inside the wall, there were many stairs leading down, and at the bottom was the main body of Sleeping Island. This is really incredible, Captain Jack smacked his lips. You turned the island into a city. Imagine, what will it look like when the tide is high? My God, you'll live under the sea level. That's true, Molly covered her mouth and laughed. That's why we have 2 docks, one under the sea and the other on the sea. Of course, it's also correct to say that one is on the sea and the other is in the air. Walking to the center of the island, there were already various kinds of houses built here. Different from the common wooden or brick houses, these buildings seemed to have grown out of the ground, and the feet of the houses were completely connected to the ground. There was no doubt that they, together with the wall, were Lotus' masterpiece. Sister Ashes, the northernmost house is Lady Tilly's palace. I'll take the captain to deliver the goods, so you don't need to accompany me. You can go see Lady Tilly first. The little girl waved her hand. Ashes nodded, and after saying goodbye to the two, she quickly walked towards the north. Along the way, she saw many familiar faces, and they all bowed their heads to greet her, or smiled and waved. The home of witches, this word became brighter and brighter in Ashes's heart, filling her with strength. And the creator of this home was Tilly Wimbledon, the Queen of Witches. Unlike the palace of the royal family, this spacious house didn't have any guards, nor did it have a locked door. Ashes directly passed through the vestibule and walked into the hall, only to see a familiar back appear in front of her. She tiptoed behind the gray-haired woman, and reached out to cover the eyes of the gray-haired woman. As early as when you were at the door, I already noticed you, the other said with a smile. Don't forget how I found you in the crowd. Extraordinaires had the ability to sense magic power, and the connection between extraordinaires was even stronger. This kind of connection originated from magic power was like an invisible fetter, firmly connecting her and Tilly together. I'm back, Ashes said softly. Chapter 204. After the two of them cuddled for a while, Ashes noticed a pile of jewel-like gadgets placed in front of her and asked curiously, "What are these?" "Come," Tilly patted her side and said, "I'll show you something interesting." Ashes sat cross-legged next to her. She saw her putting on a white silk glove, and the back of her hand was inlaid with a sparkling ruby. "This is a tracing stone." Tilly didn't reply. Instead, she smiled and stretched out her hand towards the empty space. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning jumped out from her fingertips and struck the ground, making a crackling sound. Soon after, a wisp of green smoke rose from the ground, leaving behind a palm-sized scorched black spot. Ashes could not believe her eyes for a moment. "You have a new ability?" Tilly Wimbledon was an extraordinaire. Her magic was acting on her own body, which manifested in her extraordinary intelligence. It was impossible for her to release it like ordinary witches. The lightning just now meant that she had a new ability, and it was impossible for witches to have two main abilities at the same time. This was common sense to the sisters. Tilly took off the glove and handed it to Ashes. "It's not that I have a new ability, but this stone." She raised the corner of her mouth. "It's that it changes the way magic works, so that magic shows a completely different effect." Ashes rubbed the gem in the center of the glove and was greatly shocked. She knew that Tilly would not lie to her, which meant that non-combat witches could also have fighting ability, and the witch's ability to resist foreign enemies would be greatly enhanced. "How many of these stones are there?" "Only one." Tilly seemed to have guessed Ashes's thoughts, "and it's not that easy to use. You can try to imagine magic as something that actually exists, fill the stone with it, and then release it." Ashes thought hard for a long time, but there was no trace of lightning. "Do you understand?" She laughed and said, "We're still extraordinaires, so we can sense magic power. For other witches, it's even more difficult. It takes a lot of imagination and understanding. In fact, I've asked many people to test it out, and out of 100 people, only 2 or 3 can quickly comprehend and release lightning. Are you mocking me for being stupid?" Ashes took off her gloves. "More or less," Tilly raised her eyebrows. "At that time, I only used," Ashes kissed her, and she could only let out a low moan. After they separated, the latter let out a long sigh. "All right, you're not that stupid after all. What about the other stones?" Ashes licked her lips. Only in front of the 5th princess could she completely relax. "Do they all have different abilities?" "It's a different performance effect," Tilly corrected, her cheeks still blushing. "It doesn't give ordinary people the ability of witches, only magic can stimulate it." She paused. This makes me wonder. What question? In the end, what is magic power? Tilly calmed herself down and explained word by word. For a long time, witches have a wide variety of abilities, showing a high degree of uncertainty, and under the perception of extraordinaires, they are also different. But this strange stone completely unifies the magic power. Any witch can release the same ability through it, so I may have been thinking in the wrong direction. Maybe magic itself is an omnipotent force, and witches only have one of its manifestations. What about these magic stones? Ashes asked. They can only be released, but they can't gather magic power. At present, it is not clear whether they are man-made or naturally formed, Tilly regretfully said. Legend has it that they were excavated from the ruins, and now most of them have been scattered among the people. I can only collect these few. I heard that there are ancient ruins in the eastern forest of Sewanshire. I really want to go there and take a look. Maybe I can find more information about magic power and historical faults. She's saying something that I don't understand, Ashes helplessly thought. As long as I can live, who cares what happened more than 400 years ago? It's best not to. Sewanshire is now one of the most dangerous places in Greycastle. Why? Before I set off from the port of Clearwater, I heard the sailors chatting about Garcia Wimbledon's Black Sail fleet being dispatched, and it seems that their destination is Sewanshire, which is Timothy's territory. She probably wants to take advantage of the flexibility and concealment of the sea, and directly attack his rear camp. Ashes advised, wait until the martial law is lifted, then I will have the opportunity to leave the port. If their information is accurate, I'm afraid that Sewanshire has already fallen into a sea of fire. Are they still fighting each other? Tilly looked a little worried. If this goes on, the church will take advantage of the situation. If they can't unite, Greycastle will be like the kingdom of endless winter, swallowed up by the church. This sentence startled Ashes, and the fifth princess quickly noticed her strangeness. What's wrong? Nothing. She blinked her eyes. Your appearance just now was a bit similar to Roland Wimbledon. He also said the same thing to me. Oh. You actually saw him. Tilly became interested. That's right, you didn't tell me what you gained from this trip to the Western Territory. Quickly tell me. I heard the news of the Witch Cooperation Association and went to Border Town. This should have already been told to you by the shadow. Ashes took the other into her arms. In the end, I found out that the so-called search for the Holy Mountain was actually a scam set up by Roland. He took over the Witch Cooperation Association, and secretly recruited witches. She briefly recounted what she had seen and heard in the following week. Finally, he told me that we must unite in order to resist the church's attack, and that if we can't stay in the fjords, he will always welcome us to come to Border Town. Well. Tilly pondered for a moment, then suddenly said, this man isn't Roland Wimbledon, he has been replaced. Ah. You said that he has gathered a large number of witches around him, right? My guess is that a witch has taken control of him, or simply changed into his appearance. Tilly said bluntly, I grew up with Roland, so I am very clear about this. Compared to the other two brothers and the third princess, he is the worst at concealment, and his lies are full of loopholes, so it is impossible for him to disguise himself as someone else. As for the weapon that you said was able to fight against the God's punishment army, it proves this point. A person can hide their character, but they can't fake their knowledge. The court tutor simply didn't teach them these things, so how did he know? Tilly said bluntly, in this world, there is no one who can be born with knowledge, so he certainly can't be my stupid and annoying brother. Is that true? Ashes frowned. Even so, I still need to contact them. Tilly sighed. Roland Wimbledon is, after all, my brother. Although he is ignorant and incompetent, he is not incorrigible. Compared to the others, he is the most harmless one. I hope that the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association have not yet buried him in the ground. I don't think they will do that. Ashes couldn't help but think of Vendi. Moreover, I left Maggie there, and at the end of the month, she will bring us more news about Border Town. That's the only way. After all, our current focus is not here. The fifth princess stood up from her arms, walked to the garden, and opened her arms. Since you are back, the cleaning plan can begin. I want the fjords to no longer have any traces of the church's existence, and eventually the fjords islands will become the witch's residence. The sun shone on Tilly's body from behind, as if gilding her silhouette with a layer of gold. Her long gray hair caressed her cheeks, like a light golden thread, and her expression was full of confidence, as if no difficulty could knock her down. Chapter 205. After repelling Timothy's troops, Border Town regained its tranquility. Roland selected 3 people from the City Hall's Department of Education and 2 teachers to form a team, carrying Soroya's photocopied books to Longsong's stronghold. No matter how effective it was, he had finally taken the first step in assimilating Longsong's stronghold. Although Perrault was not good at commanding battles, he was indeed excellent at administration. In just 1 week, 2,000 handymen had arrived in Border Town under the escort of the knight. If the second batch of 10 furnaces had not been put into production, Roland would not have dared to establish a hard road between the 2 places. Now, he finally had the opportunity to squander it. This road was named Kingdom Main Street by Roland, and was under the sole responsibility of the Minister of Construction, Carr. Its structure was exactly the same as that of Border Town streets, both were cement-stabilized gravel layers. In the era when there were no heavy vehicles, such a road surface was enough to carry out transportation tasks. Moreover, it had a good drainage performance and could be paved with asphalt or concrete depending on the situation. In terms of construction materials, for steam-driven mills replaced manpower and carried out the stone crushing work, producing dozens of tons of gravel every day. The weak transportation capacity limited the further increase in production. It took more than 100 people a day to carry so many stones in carriages to the construction site. If it were the road overlords of the future, only 1 cart would be needed to transport all the stones. In the furnace area, except for the 4 clay bricks, the rest of the blast furnaces had been put into the production of cement powder. After many component tests and the iron powder supplied by the mine, the cement produced by Border Town was now far better than the first batch of products, both in quality and stability. However, the large number of people transporting gravel and cement powder also brought a lot of negative effects to Border Town, the most serious of which was the problem of dust. In the afternoon, with only a slight breeze, dense dust could be seen flying all over the sky, and the streets had turned pale yellow. Although most of the townspeople did not mind such a situation, for Roland, there was nothing worse than having to close the doors and windows on a hot summer day. Therefore, the carriages carrying cement and gravel were quickly installed with covers to reduce the scattering during the transportation. At the same time, with the help of Leaf's ability, the small town was covered in shade in just a few days. The luxuriant and leafy parasol trees lined up symmetrically along the streets, making the town appear green as far as the eye could see. Coupled with Roland's call for all his subjects to take the initiative to sprinkle water to reduce the dust, the problem was quickly solved. The straight-line distance between the 2 places was less than 70 kilometers. However, considering that the construction of the road had to avoid the foot of the impassable mountain range, the total length of the road was about 100 kilometers. The estimated construction period was 1 year. With good roads, some forms of transportation could also be put to use, such as bicycles and steam cars. In his vision, the development of education and the construction of roads were all measures to connect the 2 places together, just like the integration of cities and towns in later generations. After the land development between the 2 places was completed, Longsong's stronghold and Border Town would merge into a huge city. If he could turn the hills in the south into a part of the city, and then open up the border mountains, he would even have an outlet to the sea. Of course, developing so much land required more people, and in order to cope with the possible outbreak of war in the future, the city had to be self-sufficient in agriculture, while also providing a large number of workers for industrial production. According to preliminary calculations, he needed to introduce about 100,000 people, and the largest city in Greycastle, King's City, only had about 20,000 to 30,000 people. Roland set his sights on the north and south of Greycastle. These 2 places had experienced the flames of war, and when winter came, it was likely that there would be a large number of refugees who lacked food and clothing. As long as they were provided with food and warm shelter, they could be absorbed into Border Town. Even the refugees of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart were within his consideration. For this reason, he also wrote a letter to the merchant Marjorie, asking her to help him inquire about the situation in these two countries. After writing down the recent development plan, the prince folded the paper and put it in a drawer. He stretched and decided to go to Anna's room to see how her lenses were cut. Ever since he understood the reason for Soroya's evolution, he intended to make a microscope that could observe the structure of cells. If they could observe the wonderful microscopic world with their own eyes, maybe it would lead to more witches evolving new abilities, or at least it would arouse their interest in learning. For the production of a microscope, it was not difficult to make two convex lenses used to magnify the target. The difficult part was that the focal length of each hand-polished lens was different, so matching the eyepiece with the objective lens was a delicate work, and it was necessary to repeatedly adjust the distance between the two lenses. After briefly explaining the principle of convex lens imaging, he gave Anna a few pieces of excellent quality crystal, letting her try to cut the lenses and measure their focal length. Now that 3 days had passed, Roland's heart was full of curiosity as to what extent Anna had achieved. Walking to the door of Anna's room, Nightingale smiled at him and stood with her back against the wall, as if to show that she would not follow him in. Since she reduced the time of her invisibility, Roland no longer had to guess her whereabouts. Whenever he was alone with Anna, Nightingale would always choose to stand in a distant position. Pushing the door open, he saw Anna sitting in front of the table fiddling with a metal tube. "How is it?" He walked forward and asked. As soon as the words left his mouth, Roland was stunned. He saw a few microscope-like instruments on the table, and they were very similar to the schematics he had drawn. "I made a few test products according to the drawings you gave me, and I can indeed see many details that are usually difficult to see." She raised her head, and her slender bangs slid down to one side. "I used it to observe the surface of the paper, the leaves, and the water, and found that they look very different from the usual." Since the hot air balloon trip, Anna no longer used honorifics when the two of them were alone, which made him feel very relaxed. "How did you make it?" Roland was surprised. "That diagram is just a rough outline." "The outline is enough," Anna said with a smile. "You see, as long as the eyepiece and the objective lens are fixed at a suitable distance, it can magnify the image. Then, you use an iron tube to fix them, and the main body of the microscope is completed. When I tested the magnification effect of the lens, I found that the objective lens and the target have to be maintained at a specific distance to see a clear image, and if my hand shakes, it will become blurred. From your diagram, I can also see that you need a shelf to fix the lens, and the table below that carries the target can be moved up and down to obtain the best object distance." She paused. "The piece at the bottom of the diagram is a bit difficult to understand, can you tell me what it is used for?" Roland glanced at the drawing and found that he had made a mistake. It was a reflector, used to increase the light that passed through the target. In this era, the mercury mirror had not yet been invented, and the general aristocracy still used bronze or iron mirrors to tidy up their appearance. In the imperial palace, they stuck a piece of silver on the back of the glass to obtain a better reflection. Even without this mirror, as long as there was enough sunlight, the microscope could still be used. After he explained it in detail, he couldn't help but sigh at Anna's amazing comprehension. Just based on a rough outline, she was able to produce a nearly complete finished product. If it were him, he would never be able to do this. Looking at the white neck that was exposed when she lowered her head to examine the new lens, Roland couldn't help but move forward, wanting to kiss her, but she pressed her hand against his face and gently pushed him away. "Wait a moment, Your Highness, I'm busy." Chapter 206. In the end, the mirror problem was solved by Soroya. She took mercury from the laboratory and directly painted a layer of bright coating on the back of the glass. The effect was similar to that of a mercury mirror, and it also eliminated the risk of mercury poisoning. Compared to the mirror pasted with silver, the overall shape of the coated mirror was more reflective, so Roland simply took out a batch of crystal glassware and made a small portable mirror for each witch. This small gift of being able to clearly see their own appearance made all the witches very happy. Even Scroll, who usually had a calm face, showed a smile. Roland could not help but sigh. Although witches were infertile, they were still women. Unfortunately, this convenient daily necessities could not be sold to the public at a low price. The crystal glass as the substrate was very expensive, and the laboratory also needed to consume a lot of glass to make the colorless transparent container. Kyle Sichi knew how to make the colorless glass, but the laboratory was busy with many tasks, so there was no free manpower. Most of the apprentices were busy purifying the two acids and soaking the collodion, while the chief alchemist with 2 or 3 apprentices was concentrating on solving the problem of mercury fulminate. Before the industrial acid method was developed, they could not think of making anything else for the time being. Apart from the reflector, the way to move the object was also changed from a finger to a knob to control the movement of the barrel. Roland only needed to remind Anna of these changes, and she could understand it. Under the processing of the black fire, the new fixed frame was quickly finished, and 2 sets of the highest magnification lenses were selected, thus obtaining the first complete optical microscope. Taking advantage of the sunny afternoon, Roland summoned all the members of the Witch Union to the castle backyard, and the first natural biology class officially began. When Lily walked into the backyard, she found that the plants here were even more luxuriant. The grapes on the wooden shelves had already turned bright purple, and she remembered that it had been less than a week since they had last ripened. From time to time, Lightning would fly up, pick a bunch of ripe grapes, and throw them to everyone. And the big stupid bird, who had just joined Border Town, simply stood on the shelf, pecked at the grapes, raised its head, and swallowed them into its stomach. Under the shade in the middle of the backyard, His Royal Highness and Anna were chatting. They looked like an intimate couple, but Lily knew that they were definitely not flirting. If he went closer and listened carefully, he would definitely hear a bunch of inexplicable nouns and baffling debates. For example, what a ball looked like, a cat that was alive and dead, matter turning into waves, and so on. This was probably the reason why Nightingale kept a distance of more than 5 meters from the two of them. If he listened for a long time, he would definitely feel drowsy. Vendi, on the other hand, was always with Scroll. She always had a gentle smile on her face. Sometimes, she even felt that he looked at her as if he was looking at a child. Lily sighed helplessly. She glanced at Vendi's chest and then looked down at her own. There was indeed a world of difference. When would he become like that? Only then would he no longer be a child. After all the witches had arrived, His Highness Roland placed 2 grayish-black metal instruments on the table. That should be the microscope that he claimed could see the microscopic world. Lily thought, perhaps objects would indeed become different after they were enlarged, but was everything in the world composed of small balls? She still found it hard to believe. How could a round ball form a solid rock? His Royal Highness asked the guard to bring a bucket of water. He took out a few drops and put them under the microscope. Contrary to what Lily had expected, the bucket of water was neither muddy nor dirty. Under the light, it was so clear that she could see the bottom. Could it be that she could really see the flowing ball under the microscope? There is something moving in the water. To her surprise, her sisters cried out one after another. Ah, it ran away. Not just one, there seems to be a lot of them. Oh my God, is this a bug? They all look different. This one looks like a transparent crab. Lily's heart suddenly jumped. If it wasn't a ball, then it was a bug? His Royal Highness was really lying. But it was also strange that there was a bug. Just a moment ago, there was clearly nothing in the water. When it was her turn, the little girl could no longer pretend to be indifferent. She couldn't wait to squint her eyes and put her head closer to the microscope. Then she saw an incredible scene. She saw that within the narrow aperture, there were many strangely shaped objects wantonly swimming around. Some were square and had soft hair all over their bodies. Some looked like a hybrid between a beetle and a crab. There were also some that looked like grains of wheat with feet. No matter how strange their appearance was, most of them were transparent, as if they didn't have a shell or skin. They could clearly see the inside of their bodies. Of course, the stomachs of these bugs were almost empty. "Your Royal Highness, are these really bugs?" Scroll asked. "What you see should be some protists or single-celled algae. It is not appropriate to say that they are bugs, they should be classified as microorganisms." The prince explained. Microorganisms? Yes, they are also a kind of life form, but they are much smaller. In addition to the two you see, there are even smaller bacteria and viruses. The magnification of the current microscope is not enough to see these two kinds of microorganisms, and they are also the cause of food and various diseases. The more His Royal Highness Roland explained, the more excited he became. These tiny life forms are everywhere, and there are many of them. Fortunately, most of them are not resistant to high temperatures. That's why the water must be boiled before drinking, the fish must be cooked before eating, and the bathing water must not be reused. Although it was hard to imagine that there were even smaller creatures than this, Lily couldn't help but have goosebumps when she thought of how she had swallowed a lot of bugs together with the water she had drunk. Moreover, His Royal Highness said that these inconspicuous little things were the culprits of food. If bread and meat porridge can be kept fresh, then water should also be able to do so. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but release her magic to cover the water droplets under the microscope. An unexpected change happened. She saw that some of the bugs trembled, and then quickly changed their appearance. Their skin was no longer transparent, as if they were wearing purple armor. Tentacles grew all over their body and began to devour the bugs around them that didn't change. No, it wasn't devouring. Lily saw that they were assimilating each other at an alarming rate. The tentacles were like sharp swords. After stabbing into the bodies of other microorganisms, they could also change the other party into their own appearance. She didn't know whether it was an illusion or not, but she felt that these mutant bugs were still changing those invisible life forms. Soon, purple spots of light appeared in the water. After a few breaths, more and more spots of light gradually connected together, as if a layer of lavender carpet had been laid out in her field of vision. The tentacle bugs lined up one by one on the ground, neatly like an army. As if sensing her attention, their tentacles all raised up, as if saluting. Chapter 207. Nightingale watched the changes in the witch's magic power in the fog. In a world of black and white, there were few opportunities to see so many gorgeous colors. Compared to the memories of the search for the Holy Mountain, the magic power in their bodies had increased a lot, and the constant practice every day had made their ability to control their abilities more refined. But what made Nightingale feel the most was the expression on their faces. In the Witch Cooperation Association, although there was Vendy's gentle encouragement and Kara's firm action, they had never really had a good night's sleep during the days of hiding. Any rustle of grass in the wind could wake the sisters up from their dreams. The church's pursuit and the suspicious gazes of the masses made them unable to breathe. Even though they were deep in the impassable mountain range, this kind of pressure did not get much release. No one knew if they could really reach the Holy Mountain and find a place to stay. During that time, the atmosphere in the camp often became very depressed, and most of the sisters' faces were blank and numb. Now, they no longer had to endure hunger, and they did not have to worry about the church's hunting. Everyone's face exuded an unprecedented look. Seeing everyone's relaxed and natural smile, Nightingale felt the same. After all, the Holy Mountain did exist, but it was not in the barbarian land, but in this border town. At this moment, she felt a trace of magic shock. A purple mist began to spin, and the surrounding magic continued to be drawn into it, like a miniature storm. But this shock was only seen by Nightingale. She recovered from the shock and widened her eyes, holding her breath, not wanting to miss any details. Compared to Anna and Soroya, this was the first time she saw magic condensing. The center of the storm was Lily. She was completely immersed in the microscopic world under the microscope, and did not notice the qualitative changes in the magic power in her body. The mist became thicker and thicker, and as it spun faster and faster, it became more solid. At the same time, the outline also fluctuated, no longer showing the initial vortex shape. Finally, the magic power condensed into a ball and gradually stopped. Her newborn magic power was neither as hard and smooth as Anna's cube, nor as soft as Soroya's satin. It was only the size of a fist, and its body was round. There were 8 pairs of wriggling tentacles around its body, 4 facing down, and 4 facing up. At first glance, it looked like a bug. Roland did not expect that his first biology class would be so effective, and the first witch to evolve was actually Lily. Since her previous ability was to preserve food, other than daily practice, Roland did not give her any other tasks and did not know much about her. After listening to Nightingale's report, he nodded calmly. Only when the class was over did he let Lily stay behind alone. What? You're saying that my ability has evolved? Lily was also surprised. I didn't see the ball you were talking about. Of course not. Roland shook his head with a smile. The ball is thousands of times smaller than a microorganism. Even if you use an optical microscope to its limit, you can't see the ball that makes up the substance. Really? I thought I had to understand the ball theory to evolve my ability, she muttered. I don't believe that everything in the world is made up of small balls. Things as hard as rock and steel, if a large number of small balls are really stacked together, they will collapse into a pool of loose sand. So that's how it is, he thought. It seemed that the microscopic particle theory was not the only way to promote the evolution of ability. So what did you see? Well. Lily thought for a moment. Several purple bugs. I think they should be summoned by magic power. They can turn the creatures you mentioned into the same appearance. Bugs? He was slightly surprised. As big as a microorganism? Almost. She nodded. Anyway, when I looked at the drop of water with my eyes, it was still transparent and colorless. Then, let's test it. Because Lily's ability could not be directly observed with the naked eye like Anna and Soroya, it was much more difficult to test it. Roland was also shocked when he saw such a neat arrangement of microorganisms under the microscope for the first time. They seemed to have a collective consciousness, showing amazing synergy and consistency. The next step was to test it, including its role, effective time, and the effect of the stone of magic on it. The test lasted for 3 days. Although the little girl usually liked to bicker, she still meticulously carried out Roland's instructions. Through a large number of sample comparisons and discussions with Anna, he roughly figured out how Lily's new ability worked. Among these purple mutant bugs, it was obvious that they were divided into 2 major categories, the mother and the clone. When Lily released her magic power, the first microorganism to mutate was the mother. The characteristics of the mother were similar to the Blackfire. As long as there was a magic supply, it could continue to exist. The distance between it and its creator could not exceed 5 meters, otherwise it would disappear on its own. At the same time, as a summoned creature, it was affected by the god's stone of retaliation. Within the range of effect of the stone, the mother would be instantly dispersed. When the mother existed, the microorganisms around it would be assimilated into the clone in a short period of time. To Roland's surprise, the clone was the result of the ability. Just like Soroya's coating, it was no longer bound by the god's stone of retaliation. To put it simply, the queen worm created by Lily had transformed the microbes into a new kind of life form, and this life form was real. The clone microorganisms had the assimilation characteristics of the mother and would actively erode other microorganisms. However, the test results made Roland very confused. The assimilation process seemed to be endless. In some samples, the same amount of water solution of the clone was dripped in. Some microorganisms were completely transformed, while others could see the coexistence of the clone and the unmutated microorganisms. Due to the lack of more sophisticated observation instruments, this part could only be guessed. After a discussion with Anna, Roland got a preliminary idea. The number of assimilation of the clone was related to its size. Lily's ability obviously could not distinguish the types of microorganisms. Therefore, among the large number of clones made by the mother, there were viruses and bacteria that could not be observed, as well as protists and single-celled algae that could be seen with a microscope. The size of these clones determined their assimilation ability. The larger the original body, the more assimilation times after the transformation. In addition, the clones could not extend their lives by dividing and reproducing. When the assimilation times were exhausted, the last batch of clones could only survive for about a day. Boiling water could also kill most of the clones. As a new life, they were not much different from other microorganisms. However, the interesting thing was that when there was a mother around, these clones would gather around the mother like a swarm of insects and arrange themselves in neat rows, like soldiers waiting for orders. Limited by the means of observation, there were still many aspects of Lily's new ability that were unclear. For example, could the mother and the clones have a variety of effects on life like bacteria and viruses, or could they be used in chemical and food production instead of various fungi? Unfortunately, the little girl was currently completely clueless about these concepts, let alone instructing them to complete the corresponding instructions. Chapter 208. Lily wrapped her wet hair in a towel and went back to the room. Although she had previously accused the prince of pursuing pleasure too much, she had to say that the bathroom was really great. She enjoyed the cold well water under the shower, sweeping away the heat and stickiness brought by the scorching sun. After a busy day, her body felt as if it had been reborn. However, after a carefree shower, she felt a little guilty. That day, I couldn't hold back my words. Should I apologize to His Highness? Traitor. What? Lily lifted the hair stuck in front of her forehead. You obviously said that you don't believe in the ball theory, but now you are the first to evolve a new ability. Mystery Moon knelt on the bed, her upper body upright, and pointed her finger at her. You are a big liar. Lily rolled her eyes. I still don't believe it. Everything is made of a ball. How is that possible? But Sister Nightingale said that your magic has condensed. It has nothing to do with the ball. She shrugged, climbed onto the bed and pressed Mystery Moon's hand down. His Highness said that evolution doesn't necessarily have to accept the ball theory. As long as you can deeply understand your own ability, you can also make a qualitative change in your magic. Really? Mystery Moon pouted. Anyway, that's what he said. When Mystery Moon was in the Witch Cooperation Association, she was not valued, so she always lacked self-confidence, Lily thought. Unlike herself, food preservation was a very important ability for the Witch Cooperation Association, which was short of food. And she could understand the others' feelings, because after coming to Border Town, her own ability had become useless. She was also afraid that she would be kicked out of Border Town, but the result was the opposite of her worries. Although His Highness didn't give her any additional tasks, his attitude towards her wasn't much different from the other witches. Maybe this was also the reason why Mystery Moon had become bolder and bolder, instead of being so reserved and self-abased. Her cowardice was mostly because Kara had never looked at her in the eye, and even forbade her to use her ability in the camp. Then, Mystery Moon frowned. How can I understand my own ability? His Highness said that the magnetic field can't be seen or touched, and the microscope is useless. Don't ask me, I don't understand, Lily yawned. In fact, I only know what my ability looks like. His Royal Highness is talking about cells, bacteria, fungi. I don't understand. He even said that he would write a textbook for me, she said helplessly. Spare me, I don't even know how to read. I also want to become more powerful. Mystery Moon rolled on the bed. I also want to do more things for His Highness. Lily sighed. He was obviously older than her, but he acted younger than her. Really? You can ask Sister Anna. Ask her. The rolling stopped. Yes, aren't you afraid of wasting His Highness' time? Then ask Sister Anna, Lily said. In the entire town, apart from His Highness Roland, she's the only one who knows the most. But Anna is also very busy. I heard that all the machines in the town are made by her. Mystery Moon hesitated. So, you can find some free time to ask her, such as after dinner, or ask her to heat up the bath water, or simply invite her to take a bath together. Won't you have a lot of time to ask? The little girl suggested. What you said seems to make sense. Her eyes lit up. Then go to sleep, we have to get up early tomorrow. Lily untied the towel on her head, wiped it twice, and then fell on the pillow. You go blow out the candles. Well, okay. She climbed to the end of the bed and blew out the candles. Good night. The next day, Lily didn't go to the kitchen or the wheat warehouse to practice her ability as usual. Instead, she sat at the table and began to learn how to use a microscope. This was a new task assigned by His Highness. Before the textbook arrived, she had to fully understand the types and shapes of various cells and fungi, and record their differences. It didn't matter if she couldn't write, she could just draw. Moreover, according to His Highness, Anna was still trying to make a microscope with a higher magnification. If she could achieve a magnification of 400 times, she would be able to see even finer microorganisms. From now on, the content of her practice would no longer be about keeping things fresh, but to try to diversify the uses of the mother and the clone. Regarding this point, Lily found it somewhat difficult to understand. Fortunately, His Highness had proposed several practice directions, such as ordering them to simulate the appearance of a single cell, or using her consciousness to instruct them to destroy or improve cells. Of course, this must be based on a sufficient understanding of all kinds of subtle life forms. Although Lily didn't know whether she could achieve that step, she still had to try. Not to mention, exploring the unknown world itself was a very interesting thing. In the evening, Mystery Moon came back with a depressed face. What's wrong? She asked curiously, did Sister Anna say anything? She said a lot. Mystery Moon threw herself on the bed. But I didn't understand a single word. She said that the magnetic field is everywhere, and that the compass can point the way because we are in a huge magnetic field. Does this mean that my ability is basically useless? Not to mention the principle of the magnetic field, that the moving charged ball and the magnetic force are interdependent, and that the magnetic field can also produce electric current. Sure enough, if I don't understand the ball theory, I can't make progress. She muttered in a low voice, you say, am I too stupid? A little bit, Lily said while holding her forehead. Traitor. Another sister of the Witch Union had gained a new ability, which made Vendi feel very happy. Moreover, Lily's evolution made the other witches very enthusiastic about learning. After the end of tonight's class, there were still people constantly pestering Scroll with questions. Even Maggie, after hearing that learning could increase her ability, obediently squatted on the chandelier and listened to the lecture. Except for one person. When she returned to her room with the Natural Science Theoretical Foundation, Nightingale was lying in front of the table, concentrating on organizing something. Vendi knew that it definitely had nothing to do with learning. What are you doing? She asked. Dividing the dried fish slices. Do you want to eat? Nightingale held a piece of dried fish in her mouth and said vaguely, I just got it from the kitchen. So much? Vendi was surprised to see the pile of golden grilled fish on the table, a rich honey aroma assailing her nose. Well, the chef saw that I come every day, so he simply roasted the rest of the fish. Anyway, this thing can be stored for a long time. She took out a small cloth bag and put the food inside. There were also 5 or 6 similar cloth bags on the table, each one bulging. Vendi suddenly understood what she was doing. She was preparing dry food. Every time the Witch Cooperation Association was ready to leave the town, they had to divide the dry food according to the amount and put it into the cloth bag they carried with them. Along the way, no matter how hungry they were, they could only eat the prescribed amount, lest they ran out of food. Since coming to Border Town, with a stable supply of 3 meals, plus the frequent afternoon tea, the sisters no longer did this. Of course, for Nightingale, rather than saying that they were preparing dry food, it would be more appropriate to say that they were preparing snacks. Don't you read? Anyway, I don't understand, Just listening to those theories and theorems makes me dizzy." Nightingale swallowed the dried fish and said with a smile, "Moreover, my ability is enough, it doesn't matter whether I evolve or not." So that's how it is. Compared to before, at this moment, Nightingale's eyes were sparkling, there was no reluctance or hesitation, only incomparably natural. It's impossible for a confused person to show such an expression, Vendi thought, she has found her goal. When Nightingale understood the path she wanted to take, she would show her firm side. It was like this when she left her noble family, it was like this when she faced Kara, and it was the same now. Chapter 209. Stop! May shouted at Irene, who was pretending to stab the dagger, "You don't have to look so ferocious. Although he's a heinous scum, he's still the adoptive father of the character you're playing. So, you should hesitate with determination, and when you finally strike, express a peaceful expression of liberation. Do it again." "Yes," Irene said seriously. It had been more than half a month since her first performance in Border Town. She didn't know why she hadn't left, but instead participated in the performance of the second play. Now, the crew was rehearsing the third play, The Witch Diaries. Judging from the script, this play was bound to be unparalleled. It was the first time she had seen such a wonderful story with twists and turns, completely abandoning the love between the prince and the princess, and the conspiracy of the court rebels. Instead, it praised the courage, friendship, and faith of ordinary people and witches. Even after reading the whole script, she couldn't help but want to applaud the characters in the story. This was also the reason why May announced that she would stay for the time being. But the real reason, she herself didn't know. Irene fiercely stabbed the dagger, and Sam, who played the role of the adoptive father, let out a scream, "You actually." Then he tilted his head to the side, pretending to breathe. It was a little exaggerated. May shook her head. "She stabbed your heart, you don't have time to scream and then answer. You just raised your hand and pretended to grab Irene, and then you just went limp. This is the most common way to show a fatal injury. Didn't you hear anything in the drama class?" Sam's cheeks couldn't help but blush. I'm sorry." "Do it again," she said with a blank expression. But Irene's performance was somewhat beyond May's expectations. Many details were quickly corrected as long as they were mentioned once. Whether it was her serious attitude toward the play or her own acting talent, she could be regarded as one of the best. It seemed that the title of the flower of the theater was not entirely based on the mutual flattery of the actors at the bottom. "Very good this time, let's stop practicing here for today." When the content of the scene was finally smoothly expressed, May clapped her hands. "Phil and Eltec should be finished soon, right? You guys should go home and prepare dinner. After all, that water." "Tap water," Irene added with a smile. The tap water will be replenished before dusk. If we eat too late, we won't have water to bathe with." May coughed twice. "Miss May, it's mainly because Sir Knight is coming to pick you up, right?" Rosia covered her mouth and chuckled. "There's still at least half an hour until evening. I heard that Master Carter is His Royal Highness's trusted aide and often goes in and out of the castle to accompany His Royal Highness," Tina also said. As expected of the most dazzling star in the Western region. He's so eye-catching everywhere he goes. That's enough." Irene waved her hand. "Miss May may not necessarily accept Master Carter." May raised her eyebrows. Was it because she had not been so strict recently? At first, these two people did not even dare to breathe loudly in front of her, but now they actually dared to come up and joke around. It seemed that in the next few days of rehearsal, they would have to suffer a little. Otherwise, with this level, they really did not deserve to act on the same stage as her. "I'll go first. Thank you for your guidance." Irene and the group bowed their heads in salute. Originally, only drama tutors were qualified to enjoy this kind of etiquette, but May did not care. She nodded and left the rehearsal room. She felt the hot outdoor air suddenly surround her. She walked to the center of the community and sat in the shade for a while. Then, a tall man quickly walked towards her. It was Katranis, the Lord of Border Town's chief knight. Sorry to keep you waiting. He touched the back of his head. It's not that long. May smiled faintly. Let's go. Since the last time he took the initiative to invite her and was rejected, not only did he not give up, but he also persevered to visit her, which was completely different from the arrogant and indifferent appearance he showed. And she was so confused that he asked her to stay. May was very clear about the other party's intention, but when she thought about settling down in this strange land, she felt a little confused and afraid. Even when she first decided to come to see the light of dawn, she did not intend to live here with him for a long time. In Stronghold, she was a drama star surrounded by stars, but here, she was no different from the other members of the cast. Even her fame was not as good as that of Irene, who had once been the town's teacher. Passing through the wide street covered by the shade, the two walked to the convenience market in the center of the town. The appearance of this town was simply changing every week. Last week, the outside of the community was still bare, but now it was lush and green. As long as it did not rain, there was construction almost every day. If it wasn't to repair the roads, then it was to repair the houses. More often than not, the construction was carried out at the same time. It was rare to see such a scene in full swing, even in King City. The convenience market was located in the north of the square and was divided into two areas, separated by sycamore trees. On the right was the fair area, which was similar to the layout of the market. It was open to the street on all sides, and there was a wooden shed overhead. Inside were some practical ironware and agricultural products. The former included farming tools, hammers, drills, and nails, while the latter included eggs, beef, grapes, and some unknown food. These goods were placed in different categories in the stalls, and each stall was looked after by someone. On the left was the boutique area, which was much smaller and surrounded by brick walls, more like a bungalow. There were a variety of goods inside, and they were more expensive, so there were much fewer people. On her second day in town, she was dragged around by Irene. If it was not for the fact that the chief knight had said that there was a rare new product on sale today, she would have gone to the tavern to drink 2 glasses of iced ale. After registering, the two walked into the boutique area. The sales here were also very strange. There was only one entrance to the whole market, and the goods were placed on the shelves, so people could choose on their own. They didn't accept bargaining, and no one came to brag or promote their products. The prices and product introductions were written on parchment and pasted on the side. You could choose your favorite item and go to the door to pay. May noticed that there were still a dozen colored cups left on the first row of shelves, and the patterns on them were still the same as the last time she came here. This meant that these cups had not been sold for almost a month, and if it was an ordinary merchant, they would definitely have lost money. Is this market really opened by His Royal Highness? She asked. Yes, Carter nodded. That's why you can see some incredible goods. He went to the third row of shelves. For example, this. This is the rare new product you were talking about. May followed the knight and saw 5 or 6 light yellow cubes on the shelf, each about the size of a palm, but she couldn't tell what they were used for. This is something that His Royal Highness tried to make himself. Now the witches in the castle, I mean the attendants and guards, are using it. If you use it to take a bath, it can easily remove the grease that is difficult to clean. After washing, you will feel a completely different refreshing feeling, and it can also leave a rose fragrance on your body. I swear, there is nothing more magical than this when you take a shower. The chief knight said confidently. May looked at the parchment pasted on the side, and saw a string of words marked on it, soap. Chapter 210. Soap. She picked up a piece and sniffed it. She could indeed smell the fragrance of roses. Yes, it's hard to imagine that before it was made it was a sticky paste. In order to make it full of fragrance, His Royal Highness also added perfume to it. May subconsciously glanced at the price on the paper. The price of 25 silver royals per piece could be regarded as a luxury, but compared to the more expensive perfume, the price was obviously set too low. Are you sure it's perfume? When I performed in King's City, a great noble gave me 3 bottles of perfume. Each bottle was only the size of a thumb, but its price was more than 5 golden dragon. Such a big piece of soap, shouldn't it be at least half a bottle's worth? Is that so? Carter was startled. Perfume is so expensive. Of course, May gave him a blank look. It's one of the proudest products of King's City's alchemist workshop. Apart from crystal glass, perfume is the best-selling product. I heard that in addition to the batch of perfume given to the royal family, nearly 1,000 bottles of perfume are sold on the market every year. Those who can afford to buy this kind of thing are the upper nobles and wealthy merchants. If it wasn't a gift, I would never have used the remuneration of several plays to buy a bottle of perfume. But when His Royal Highness made the perfume, he didn't use any rare materials. According to him, it seems to be made from sugar cane. Carter saw May's puzzled face and added, sugar cane is a sweet stick, a crop from the fjords. It looks like a stick, and when you bite it, your mouth will be filled with sweet water. At present, it's only grown in the castle's backyard. Next time, I'll ask His Royal Highness to see if I can bring one out. His Royal Highness again. After May came to Border Town, the name she heard the most was Roland Wimbledon. Whether it was Irene or Carter, whenever they talked about the changes in Border Town, they would always mention him. It seemed that His Royal Highness was omniscient, and all these novel things were created by him. Could there really be such a knowledgeable person in the world? She doubted it. No matter how smart a person was, it would take time to learn new knowledge. Whether it was King's City or Longsong Stronghold, the recognized erudite people were all white-haired old men. There was even a saying among the people of the western region, the longer the beard, the wider the knowledge. The prince was only in his 20s. How could he know so many things? May's expression remained the same. No need. If it can be used to make perfume, it must be a very rare crop. Especially the perfume formula, it can be sold for a sky-high price in any alchemy workshop. You must not inquire about it from His Highness, and even if you see it, you must not say it. All right, Carter answered. He took out a handkerchief and wrapped the 4 soaps in it. You want to buy so many? Each person can only buy 2 pieces at most. We'll pretend to buy them separately and give them to you when we get out of here. Don't disagree yet, the knight reached out to stop May from saying what she wanted to say. I can ask His Highness if I run out of them, but I don't know when I'll get new ones if they're sold out. You can take these 4 pieces and use them for a long time. May looked at the other party's serious expression and felt as if something was burning in her heart. Use for a long time. She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She silently watched as the knight wrapped the soap. Since you're here, let's look at the other goods. He picked up the cloth bag and laughed. When she returned to her home in Border Town, it was already dusky outside the window. The evening glow shone through the window and dyed the furnishings in the room a touch of orange red. Since staying here to perform the follow-up play, May had also received a set of the same room as Irene. Although it wasn't big, it had everything. She placed the novelty goods she had bought from the convenience store on the table. In addition to the 4 pieces of soap, there was also a bottle of wine. This bottle of wine was different from the common ale and wine in pubs. It had almost no color and was as pure and transparent as water. She remembered that the product description said it was called white wine. It had a high concentration and shouldn't be drunk too much. White wine, she smiled. From the appearance, the name was really appropriate. Pulling out the wooden stopper, May poured herself a glass. She raised the glass and a pungent smell hit her nose, making her frown. But after the smell, a wisp of wine floated into her nose. It was sweet and mellow, completely unlike the taste of the inferior wine in pubs. Because acting required a high degree of concentration, she rarely went to pubs. Only after the success of the play, when the theater celebrated, would she drink a few glasses. The feeling of being drunk wasn't bad, but after witnessing the behavior of many actors when they got drunk, she always controlled her alcohol to a level where it wouldn't affect her thinking. However, May now had a strong urge to get drunk. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bought this expensive bottle of liquor despite Carter's dissuasion. She had heard from other actors that after getting drunk, they would be able to block out distracting thoughts and concerns. Seeing the true answer in their heart, she wanted to give it a try. May closed her eyes, tilted her head back and poured the wine into her mouth. Suddenly, a burning sensation exploded in her throat, causing her to spit out the wine she had not yet swallowed. She coughed so violently that she choked on her tears. What the hell? Is this even wine? When the burning sensation completely subsided, she bit her lips and tried again. This time, she only dared to swallow it in small mouthfuls. After the burning sensation, there was a rich mellow taste. The two tastes mixed together. It couldn't be said to be delicious, but it gave her a strange feeling. After only half a quarter of an hour, May felt a sense of dizziness welling up in her mind. She took out a fist-sized iron box from her pocket, opened the lid, and saw a bright mirror facing her. This mirror was different from the copper or silver mirrors in the past. Its surface was smooth and flawless, and the scene reflected in it was extremely clear. It must be very expensive. Through the mirror, May could see her slightly red cheeks and confused eyes. This was a gift from the chief knight when they parted. She wanted to refuse, but he turned around and left, not giving her a chance to refuse. He walked away quickly and turned back to wave goodbye to her. To be honest, when Carter Lannis didn't open his mouth, his appearance could be considered impeccable. But if he wasn't a chatterbox, it was unlikely that he would be able to keep her. So, should she take root in this place? Far away from the bustling city, coming to this remote town to start anew, and the only people who knew her identity were the few people in the crew. The fear of the unknown made it difficult for her to make up her mind. May spread out the letter on the table. It was sent to her by His Royal Highness through Irene. The writer was Perrault, the manager of the stronghold. From the letter, she learned that the Stronghold Theatre had announced that her whereabouts were unknown, and that Perrault himself wanted her to return to the stronghold to continue performing. His Royal Highness didn't hide this news, he gave the choice to her. May drank the rest of the wine in her glass, and her vision gradually became hazy. She staggered to the desk, spread out a piece of paper, and began to write a reply. In the midst of her overlapping thoughts, she saw the Stronghold Theatre, Irene, Phil and Eltec, the town square filled with deafening cheers, and those third-rate actors who were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. In the end, these images slowly faded away, and the only thing left in her mind was Carter Lannis' grinning face when he extended an invitation to her. "Hello, Miss May, can I buy you a drink?" Chapter 211. Roland sat at his desk, looking at the chief knight who came to report on the First Army's recent situation with great interest. Compared with his meticulous appearance a few months ago, Carter's icy face now had a different kind of emotion. The sense of calmness had faded a lot, and there was more expectation and impatience in it. It probably has something to do with the star of the Western region, he thought. Roland had also heard a little about the fact that Carter and May had recently gotten close to each other. After all, as one of the higher-ups of the First Army and his representative in the army, his every move was being watched, not to mention the eye-catching May beside him. When they first appeared side by side on the street of the small town, the guards had already passed the news to him. Roland did not care about this kind of thing. Carter was about 2 or 3 years older than him, and it was very strange that he was still unmarried. It would be good if he could find his other half in the Western region, as long as it did not affect his work. According to the Chief Knight's report, the First Army currently had about 200 wheels in the production line, and almost every day there would be a new batch of about 10. In fact, if there were enough raw materials, Anna's production capacity could be increased several times, but she had to be responsible for the pig iron smelting and the steam engine at the same time, so the speed was slowed down. But this speed was acceptable. After all, there were only 600 people in the First Army, and in another month and a half, they would all be equipped. And before the new wave of population expansion, the scale of the army could not be further expanded for the time being. Another point was the establishment of the Second Army. For the convenience of training and the need for confidentiality, after the civilians recruited from Longsong's stronghold passed the examination, they were all incorporated into the Second Army by Roland. They were currently undergoing disciplinary training, which was the same as military training. In the evening, there was ideological education, striving to make these people believe that they were the guardians of the Western region and that the safety of their relatives needed them to protect as soon as possible. At present, the training of the Second Army personnel is progressing well, and it is expected that in another week, they will be able to start shooting training. By that time, the eliminated flintlocks will be enough for everyone, Carter concluded. That was where Bing's advantage lay. To train a cold weapon warrior, it would require at least a year, and to train a knight, it would require around 5 to 6 years, while Bing only needed a month to form an army to fight. The longer a battle lasted, the more Bing had the advantage, since pulling the trigger was much easier than waving the sword. You must pay attention to the management of the gun during the live-fire practice. You must take back as much as you fire. The same goes for the gunpowder. Distribute it on the spot during practice and arrange for the veterans of the First Army to supervise. Yes, he answered with a nod. Very good. Roland waved his hand. In that case, you can go back to work. Your Highness. Carter hesitated and said, last time, you said that the perfume mixed into the soap was made of sugar cane. Is this true? Yes. The prince leaned back in his chair. What's wrong? Is sugar cane very expensive? No, it's just an ordinary crop. I heard that in King's City, a thumb-sized bottle of perfume can be sold for 5 golden dragon. Carter scratched his head. If that's the case, wouldn't using sugar cane perfume bring a lot of income to Border Town? 5 golden dragon. Roland was startled. He had never considered this point. Thinking back to the time when he was in the palace, the fourth prince never cared about the price of a daily necessities. Perfume was even more so. Only women loved these things that could make them full of fragrance. His original motive for buying perfume was just to get soap. Otherwise, with only running water and no soap in the bathroom, he would feel that something was missing. Letting bubbles rub all over his body was the romance of the bathroom. If a small bottle of perfume could buy several golden dragons, it would indeed be a good business. Unlike coated mirrors, sugar cane and flowers as raw materials were much cheaper than crystal glass. Thinking of this, Roland smiled. This is a good idea. I'll think about it. Your Royal Highness, then, can I take a piece of sugar cane out of the castle? The chief knight asked, full of expectation. No problem. Hearing his tone, Roland guessed what the other side wanted to do. After all, the western region was not like the port of Clearwater, where the plants of the fjords were quite rare. As a gift to make a lady happy, it would be a good choice. It's on the wall in the backyard, go and pick it yourself. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Carter bowed and left. Then Roland called Barav. Now it was not appropriate to call him an assistant minister. As the head of the city hall, he could already be regarded as the chief administrative officer of Border Town. After Barav sat down, Roland roughly explained the matter of the perfume. What do you think of this business? Can we earn a lot of golden dragons? Barav didn't immediately answer. Instead, he opened his eyes wide and asked, Your Royal Highness, are you sure that the perfume is made from those sweet crops? Didn't I give you the soap to use? The reason why it has a fragrance is because it was mixed with perfume. Roland spread out his hands. Its raw materials are indeed these worthless things. I just don't know if the perfume in King's City is really as expensive as Carter said. It's far more than that, Your Royal Highness. Barav excitedly said, perfume is a top-secret product of King's City Alchemist Workshop. Every year, about 1,000 bottles are produced, and only a small part of them will be sold in King's City. If sold to other cities in Greycastle, the price can increase by 20 to 30%. If sold to the fjords and other kingdoms, the price can almost double. In order to prevent merchants from making a profit, the association not only firmly controls the price of perfume in other places, but also personally designates merchants. If you can produce perfume, even if you only sell it to Redwater City and Fallen Dragon Ridge, you can still get a generous return. So that's how it is. Roland thought, thinking that Berev was indeed an assistant to the Minister of Finance for 20 years. Berev was indeed very good at commodity prices and trade. With this information, Roland formed a preliminary plan in his mind. There were many ways to make perfume. The simplest way was to crush the petals or herbs with a unique fragrance and soak them in alcohol, letting the alcohol dissolve the aromatic oil in the plants. Finally, the residue was filtered and diluted with water. The alcohol came from the fermentation of sugar cane juice. The raw materials for the aromatic oil could be rose, or the more common rosemary and spirit vanilla. However, since he wanted to achieve mass production, it was the best choice to let Leaf cultivate a batch of magically modified plants that could directly secrete the aromatic oil. In addition to perfume, the industry could also produce white sugar and liquor, which were also consumables in high demand. Although the profit was not as high as the perfume, if it could be sold to the townspeople at a low price and enrich their diet, it would also be a big step forward for the people's livelihood. The reason why Roland delayed the development of light industry was that it was difficult to earn high profits from small-scale production of daily necessities when there was a shortage of manpower. Investing the limited population into heavy industry production was the most cost-effective approach. Chapter 212. In the second month of summer, on the midsummer day, Marjorie arrived as promised. This time, the ships brought by the merchant groups far exceeded the upper limit that the pier could accommodate. Many sailboats could only be docked by the river, waiting for the ship in front to finish unloading before they could connect to the pier. This made Roland realize that the town's pier must be expanded. Greycastle Industries had finally completed its task this month, reducing the waste rate to 40%, and successfully produced 3 steam engines before the delivery date. Although compared to the third-generation steam engine currently in use in the town, the factory produced foreign trade products in terms of power, leakage, noise, vibration and other aspects were much worse, but compared to the prototype engine, it was already a significant improvement. The Crescent Moon Bay caravan brought a team of 300 craftsmen according to the contract, and Roland placed them all in the industrial park on the south bank of the Redwater River. In addition to building a new wooden factory next to the original factory, he also ordered Carr to build a staff dormitory near the river bank in the park. In order to complete this facility within a month, after the huge logs were transported to the site, Carr was responsible for technical guidance, while Anna cut them. The wood processing process, which was supposed to take the longest time, was completed in just 2 days. Carl, Anna's former teacher, was dumbfounded by her new ability. In just half a year, this thin and quiet girl had become full of confidence and high spirits. Roland held a sumptuous dinner in the castle to welcome the arrival of the merchants. At the same time, for the first time, white wine appeared in everyone's line of sight. "Every time you come here, there is always something new, Marjorie really didn't lie to me," Hogg shouted, "even the wine is so different, compared to this, white wine," Marjorie reminded. "Yes, white wine. Compared to it, ale and wine are simply bland and tasteless." He grinned and drank the wine in his glass. "Your Highness, you must sell me a few boxes of this thing. I think it tastes too hot, fruit wine is more suitable for me." The female merchant smiled and shook her head. Roland smiled. "This is related to the taste, not everyone can accept a high concentration of distilled wine. I don't intend to promote it, I just happen to make some for everyone to taste." In the era when brewing was still the mainstream, distilled spirits were obviously a new star with great potential for development. White spirits, rum, whiskey, and vodka were all distilled spirits with high alcohol content, and on top of these distilled spirits, a series of corresponding bartending culture was also extended. But for the current border town, it was still too early to develop this industry. Your Royal Highness, I've already sent people to collect a lot of information regarding the matter you instructed me to do in your last letter, Margaret said. After the Church of Everwinter took control of the Kingdom of Wolfshart, there hasn't been much change. Instead, the resistance from the Wolfshart Kingdom has become much stronger. It is said that the Church's troops have all gathered at Broken Tooth Castle and haven't been able to take a step forward for more than 2 months. In addition, the King of Dawn sent a messenger to Grey Castle, saying that the Church's army had gathered in Broken Castle, unable to move for more than 2 years. He called on the 2 countries to form an alliance to expel the Church and fight against the Holy City of Hermes together. How did King City respond? Roland asked. The Prime Minister, Marquis Wyke, rejected the proposal and reprimanded the other side as nonsense. Gamel shrugged. This matter has caused an uproar in King City, and even the nobles haven't reached a consensus. As far as I know, many people support the alliance. After all, the Church has shown no sign of returning the ruling power to the successor of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter. Timothy didn't show up. The Prime Minister's answer must have been inspired by Timothy. He himself has now rushed to the eastern region with his army, Marlon said with a dignified expression. I heard that a huge fleet landed in Seawanshire and plundered along the eastern coastline. Even the churches weren't spared, and many fjords merchants also suffered. A large number of fugitives have appeared in the eastern region. Hogg and I have taken in many of them, Marjorie added. They said that this group of looters not only robbed money, but also people. They burned everything they couldn't take away, as if they wanted to turn the entire eastern region into a piece of white land. This is definitely a heavy blow to Timothy, who has just subdued the nobles of the eastern region. Timothy receiving a blow should have been a happy thing, but when he heard that the other side was looting people, Roland felt a burst of pain in his heart. Those fugitives, are you interested? Marjorie said with a smile, when I saw that letter, I guessed that you might want to buy a large number of slaves to enrich the labor force of your territory. But compared to the foreign refugees of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, these people of Grey Castle may not be willing to sell themselves as slaves. I don't need to make them slaves. As long as these people are willing to settle in Border Town, they will have food and housing, and they will also be paid for their work. Roland corrected. At the same time he realized that this was a good opportunity to expand the number of people, although this news came a little late. How many people do they have? Most of the strong refugees have been taken in by the nobles and caravans, and there are still nearly 10,000 people gathered outside King's City, but there are more young people and women. It doesn't matter, I will send someone to screen and lead the way. The prince decided. Do we need to deal with the officials of King's City to take them away? No need, Marjorie waved her hand. They are eager for you to take this group of people away, otherwise there will not be enough relief food, and if their number continues to increase, it is likely to lead to a refugee riot. After the end of the dinner, Roland returned to his office and called his guard Theo. This incident made him realize that his own intelligence system was very backward. If he had known about the fugitives in the first place, he would have been able to make early preparations, and bring more people to Border Town. At present, all his knowledge of the outside world came from the caravans, and the transmission speed of once a month simply couldn't meet his needs. Even if he stationed troops in Longsong's stronghold and established a sentry post, he could only monitor the Western Territory. If he wanted to compete for the throne of Grey Castle, he had to expand his vision to the whole country, or even the whole continent. Roland didn't have enough loyal people to form a complete intelligence team, and it was even more impossible to find spies and secret agents lurking in various places. So he planned to start from the basics, arranging some people to go to King's City and collect information from all over the country. Even if he didn't have detailed monitoring, at least he could quickly understand the changes in the overall situation, and wouldn't be as passive as he was today. Theo, who was very familiar with the forces of King's City's Black Street, was the best candidate for the prince. You want me to follow the caravan back to King's City? Theo was stunned. Yes, you have 2 tasks. The first is to help me take in the refugees from the eastern region. I will send a team of about 100 soldiers to escort them, and I will tell you the detailed screening conditions before the caravan leaves. Yes. The second point, after the end of the refugee wave, you will stay in King's City and help me collect information from all over the country. You have dealt with the underground rats before, so you should know what to do. Marjorie's caravan will fully support you, and the cost of the task will be directly collected from them. Unlike the last time you went to Redwater City to spread the news of the witches, this time there is no upper limit to the cost. He put a revolver on the table. Pay attention to protect yourself, and I hope to hear good news from you soon. Chapter 213. 4 days later, the caravan raised its sails and left the dock. Theo and 100 soldiers of the First Army set off for King City. During these days, Roland and Marjorie reached an agreement. Theo could withdraw any amount of golden dragon from her shop, which would be deducted from the sale price of the steam engine. In addition, Roland also needed to pay an additional 1% interest. This time, the other side brought almost twice as much saltpeter and/or ingots as the last time, but with the deposit for the transformation of the 2 river boats, Roland still received more than 2,200 golden dragon. This was almost an unimaginable number during the months of the demons. Even if he sold the ore for a month, he would only earn 300 golden dragon. After the caravan left, it was time for Maggie to temporarily leave Border Town. According to the agreement with Ashes, she would go to the Fjord Islands and bring news about the western region. Roland specially wrote a long letter to her. In addition to expressing the attitude of mutual cooperation, he also hoped that the 5th princess could send some auxiliary witches to assist him. In the letter, he didn't use the identity of the brother, but rather the identity of the Lord of Border Town, the western region governor. Although the possibility of the other side agreeing was very small, he still had to try. Anyway, writing a few more words wouldn't take much effort. The place of farewell was in the castle's backyard, where all the witches were present. Nightingale gave her a small bag of dried fish slices, Lightning gave her a bag of pepper powder. The other witches reluctantly stroked her feathers and hugged her to say goodbye. It was as if they were parting forever. Don't worry, Coo. She raised her head and said, I'll be back soon, Coo. What if Tilly doesn't let you come back? Lightning said worriedly. Coo. The pigeon shrunk her neck and thought for a moment, then shook her tail feathers. Then I'll secretly fly back, Coo. That's a promise, the little girl promised seriously. If you come back, I'll personally catch a bunch of birds and roast them for you to eat. Also, the beehive we found last time, we'll wait for you to come back and dig it out together. Coo. She nodded repeatedly. That's a promise, Coo. What else could he say? Roland sighed with emotion. It had only been a month, and Maggie had been completely swayed to his side. Well done, Lightning. Then, goodbye everyone, Goo. Maggie spread her strong wings and ran on the ground for a while before slowly flying up. After circling twice, she gradually disappeared into the southeast. She'll be able to arrive safely, right? Roland looked at her slow movements and couldn't help but worry for her. No problem, Lightning said without hesitation. Then she tilted her head and said, I think. After sending off Maggie, Roland quickly threw himself into his daily work. This time, he wanted to draw a complete set of design plans for the 2 ships left behind by the Crescent Moon Bay caravan to be rebuilt, and they would also become the world's first batch of steam-powered paddle steamers. Since it used a single power source, there was no need for a gearbox, and the steam engine power shaft was directly connected to the paddle wheel. Multiple air pipes were used to control the intake of air, thus controlling the speed of the ship. When you want to slow down or stop the ship, you only need to close the intake pipe and let the excess steam escape from the exhaust port. At this time, the furnace was still burning, so it was very easy to speed up again. The principle wasn't difficult, so Roland quickly drew a rough model. If you want to get an accurate production plan, you have to go to the site to measure the specific size. At this time, Anna came into the office holding a book. What's wrong? He put down the quill and couldn't help but smile. I finished reading this book. She put the book on the desk. It was the book, Theoretical Basis of Natural Science. Roland's smile suddenly froze on his face. This is too exaggerated. in just a few months, she finished reading high school level mathematics and physics? He didn't ask if she understood, because if Anna finished reading, it meant that she completely understood, otherwise she would definitely read it again and again, or ask him. These drawings you drew, do you want to use the steam engine to replace the sail to power the ship? Anna's attention was quickly attracted by the sketch on the table, but what? Aren't these two wheels similar to paddles? When they turn, they can produce thrust, but half of them are exposed, which is equivalent to wasting some of the power. Why don't you bury them all in the water? Roland was stunned, he didn't know what to say. People born with knowledge can't exist, in other words, she made the above judgment based on this instant impression. He suddenly became interested, then what do you think we should do? Anna thought for a while, picked up the quill, and began to draw on the paper. Roland supported his chin with his hand and watched with great interest as she drew seriously. Her bangs, which had slipped out of the hairpin, swayed back and forth with her movements, and her slender eyelashes fluttered from time to time. Her white cheeks revealed a natural blush. Although he could only see the side of her face from this angle, under the light, the outline from the bridge of her nose to her chin and neck formed a perfect and soft curve. Do you want to eat fish? Nightingale came over and put her hand between the two. Yes, Anna nodded, and took the snack that the latter handed to her, thank you. Roland, whose vision was blocked, coughed twice, and had to shift his gaze back to the drawings on the table. At first, Anna tried to completely bury the wheel in the water, but this would make it difficult to see the position of the wheel when the ship docked, and it would be easy for it to hit the pier or the pier. After that, she placed the paddle wheel at the stern of the ship. This was also a common practice, but the transmission setup was much more complicated. After all, the heavy steam engine was not suitable to be placed at the end of the hull. As a result, the transmission shaft and the gearbox occupied a considerable part of the hull. When Roland saw the new drawings she drew, he couldn't help but be amazed at her sharp thinking ability. The sketch that Anna was thinking about was infinitely close to the arrangement of a single-shaft propeller. The steam engine was set at the bottom of the hull, the transmission shaft extended from the bottom of the hull below the waterline, and the end was connected to 4 square blades, which looked a bit like a windmill. I don't know if this will work, she said hesitantly. It is reasonable to say that as long as the paddles maintain an angle, it can produce a horizontal force, but I reduced the wheel, and only 4 paddles may not be able to move the hull. Of course it can, just a little modification will be enough. Roland took the quill from Anna's hand and drew the original shape of the propeller. Compared to the windmill shape, this shape of the paddles is more suitable for rotation in the water. Your idea is completely correct, but the requirement of the contract is to transform it into a paddle steamer, so we will still follow the first method. This has nothing to do with technology, but a business strategy. He paused. I'm going to test the hull data now. Do you want to come with me? Anna blinked her pair of blue eyes. Yes. After mastering the theory, the best way to learn was to verify it in practice. Nightingale. When Anna followed the prince to the door, she saw that Nightingale was still looking at the drawings on the table, so she couldn't help but ask. Ah, you go first, I'll be right there. Chapter 2:14. The merchant fleet followed the tributary of the Redwater River to the north, and after passing through Silver City, they entered the Grand Canal leading to King City. Theo remembered reading in the Chronicles of Grey Castle that 200 years ago, this place was still a wasteland. In order to transport the silver extracted from the nearby mines back to King City, Wimbledon I gathered stonemasons and nearly 10,000 handymen, spending 20 years digging the canal connecting King City and the silver mines. Gradually, a city was formed around the silver mines, which was later named Silver City by the late king. However, the scene in front of him now was difficult to associate with the wasteland of 200 years ago. On both sides of the canal were lush farmland, and a little farther, there were even villages. This made him think of Border Town's Kingdom Main Road. When the road was repaired, he was afraid that the foot of the impassable mountain would also become densely populated. I heard that you used to live in King City. A woman's voice sounded from behind him. Theo turned his head and found that it was the owner of the caravan, Marjorie. He nodded. Before becoming a palace guard, I lived in the inner city. How does it feel to return to your old home? To be honest, it's good, he said. If it wasn't for His Highness' arrangement, I would rather stay in Border Town. Although King's City is prosperous, it makes people feel like they can't breathe easily. This was especially true for the lower nobles, Theo thought. Is that so? Marjorie smiled. How much do you know about His Highness Roland? What's wrong? This question made his heart slightly shiver. I think he's really an incredible person. Obviously, when he was in King's City, his reputation was extremely bad. You should have heard a lot of rumors about him, but in Border Town, he's completely different from what the rumors say. No matter what he does or what he thinks, it's hard to fathom him. She paused. If the steam engine is just a proof of his erudition, then why is it that even the soldiers he trained are so different? Theo glanced at the soldiers of the First Army sitting on the deck. Considering that their activities near King's City should be as hidden as possible, they weren't equipped with guns, nor did they wear the same military uniform. Instead, they changed into a variety of leather armors and carried a wooden spear on their back, looking like the caravan's guards. It was the first time for most of them to leave the western region. Although they looked around curiously and discussed spiritedly, no one took off their shoes or put down their weapons. On the other hand, many of the mercenaries in the caravan had already gone into the cabins to avoid the sunlight. The 3 or 4 people left on the deck had taken off their shoes and weapons and laid down in the shade. I'm not sure either, Theo helplessly spread out his hands. It wasn't that he wanted to hide it, but he really didn't know that the 4th prince had become very different since he arrived in Border Town. Maybe His Highness has been disguising himself before. Is that so? Marjorie did not comment on this answer. She was silent for a moment, and then suddenly pointed in front of her. Look, that's the King's City wall. We're almost there. At the end of their field of vision appeared a hazy greenish-gray. Just by standing here, they could feel the magnificence of the city wall. It was the most outstanding work of the masons before they were disbanded. Whether it was the height or the thickness, it was second to none in Grey Castle. Theo had heard that there were even rooms and passages inside the city wall, which could accommodate nearly 1,000 soldiers to rest, so that they could achieve uninterrupted patrols and quick support. When the city wall clearly appeared in front of Theo, the figures of the refugees also entered his field of vision. A large number of civilians had gathered on the outskirts of King's City. They had set up simple sheds along the walls, and in front of the sheds there was a fire pit that emitted white smoke. It seemed that they were cooking oatmeal. At present, it seemed that these people hadn't run out of food yet, and their complexions were still good. However, the relief food in King's City would certainly not be distributed endlessly. When the nobles had finished selecting the right labor force, they would send troops to drive these people away. What are you going to do? Marjorie asked curiously. Will you send His Highness's soldiers to go out and recruit people? No, not to mention that it would be inefficient, it would also easily attract the attention of others. Theo shook his head. If you want to do something in King's City, you either have to bribe the officials or hire the rats. You should have a deep understanding of this. Indeed, she laughed. I wanted to give you a warning, but it seems that it is unnecessary. So, if you have a need for money, don't hesitate to come to me. Marjorie handed him a token. As long as you show this, the shop manager will immediately contact me. Of course, less than 100 golden dragon stones can be directly withdrawn with it. Thank you. Theo took the token. It was a dark red stone, the whole body was clear, and the end was engraved with a line of characters that he had never seen before. You're welcome, she said with a chuckle. His Highness will repay me the money together with the interest. After arriving at the canal pier, Theo let the soldiers of the First Army stay in the suburbs and wait for news, as far as possible to avoid the sight of King's City's patrols, while he himself entered the city with the caravan. When he passed through the city gate, he noticed that the guard's inspection was a lot stricter, obviously they didn't want to let the refugees from the eastern region mix into the city. Entering the city, the first thing that caught his eye was a row of towering gallows. Hanging from the gallows were 4 women with their hands tied behind their backs, exposed to the scorching sun, giving off a horrible stench. This scene made Theo immediately frown. Timothy has been wantonly searching for witches in the city. They are all unfortunate people who have been caught, Marjorie sighed. But it is not accurate to say that some of the witches are just the result of the nobles getting tired of playing with them, so they took this opportunity to get rid of them. It is hard to say whether it is better to continue to be imprisoned in a dark room, or to get rid of the pain as soon as possible. Anyway, I hope they can rest in peace. During his 6 months in Border Town, Theo had already realized that the witches weren't as unforgivable as the church's propaganda. In addition to their strange abilities, there was no difference between them and ordinary people. Judging from the stature of the women hanging from the gallows, the youngest one was probably only 14 or 15 years old. This made his heart feel a little stuffy, and the feeling of being unable to breathe came back. The outer city of King's City hadn't changed much since half a year ago. In addition to the main road directly facing the city gate, which was paved with bluestone, the other roads and alleys were all covered with mud. The midsummer sun caused the ground to crack, and whenever a carriage passed by, it would raise a burst of yellow dust. It was hard to imagine that the capital of the kingdom would unexpectedly lose out to a remote town outside the Western Territory in terms of municipal construction. After crossing 2 streets, the caravan headed towards the market area. Theo waved goodbye to Marjorie, then turned into an alley. He arrived at the entrance of the Underground Trumpeter Tavern, pushed the door open, and walked in. "Hey! This place only opens at night," someone shouted. Theo ignored them and went straight to the front of the bar. Facing the burly man who was immersed in wiping a glass, he said in a deep voice, "Do you still remember me? Which rock did you jump out of? Didn't you hear that the tavern only opens at night?" He impatiently put down his glass and raised his head with a gloomy face. The 2 waiters who were arranging the tables and chairs also came over. "Now I will count to 3, Sir Theo." Chapter 2:15. After taking Theo to a small room on the 2nd floor of the tavern, the brawny man ordered the bartender to continue cleaning, and then closed the door. This place was used to entertain customers with special needs, and it only charged 25 copper royals a night, so the environment couldn't be considered elegant. The narrow bed had an unpleasant musty smell, and the bedding was wrinkled, as if it hadn't been washed and dried for a long time. The cracked wooden table was missing a corner, and the cracks were filled with black flock, making the table look greasy and dirty. But Theo was too lazy to care. He sat on the edge of the bed, quietly waiting for the other side to speak. "It's been a long time," the brawny man grinned, "since Sir Naji replaced your position. How come you don't even come to the tavern? Even if you're no longer responsible for this matter, you can still come and have a drink." His nickname was Black Hammer, the watchman of the Underground Trumpeter Tavern, and a member of the Skeleton Fingers. It sounded scary, but he was just one of the many rats in King's City's Black Street. The rats formed their own cliques, divided their territories, and according to the different businesses they operated, they formed a huge and loose organization. These underground organizations were more or less backed by great nobles or wealthy merchants, and the Skeleton Fingers were no exception. But unlike domestic dogs, most rats didn't choose to be loyal to a single person. As long as there were benefits, they could work for anyone. "Enough nonsense," Theo said bluntly. "Tonight, you call Sylvie, Swineherd, Silver Ring, and Pottery Pot over, right here in this tavern. I have something to arrange." "These are the people of the Underground Trumpeter." Black Hammer was startled. "Just them alone are enough?" "As I said, this is a good business." He shrugged his shoulders. "Seeing that you've done a lot of things for me, I specifically looked for you." According to the usual procedure of dealing with the Black Street, the first thing to do was to find a contact person, and then the other party would decide whether or not to accept the task. After the two reached an agreement, the contact person would entrust the task to the right person, and at the same time collect the fee. Of course, There was no contract or written proof to guarantee this process, so whether or not the employer's expectations could be achieved was completely unknown. Generally speaking, the more famous an organization was, the more they cared about their own credibility, and the higher the commission fee was, while the new organization charged a low fee, but it was easy to end up with nothing. These rats and the city patrol formed a delicate balance, working together to maintain the order on the surface of the kingdom. Before entering the palace and becoming a palace guard, Theo had served in the patrol team, responsible for handing over some inconvenient matters to the various Black Street organizations. Therefore, he was well aware of the few most powerful groups of rats in the capital, which also saved him the time to deal with the informant. As for the reason why he chose the skeleton fingers, it was because they weren't completely broken. "May I ask, who are you working for now?" Black Hammer asked after hesitating for a moment. Theo didn't answer, but pointed his thumb in the direction of the palace behind him. Most people only knew that he had become an imperial guard, but they didn't know that not long after, he had been selected by Wimbledon III to be the personal guard of the fourth prince, and had followed his royal highness to Border Town. They must have thought that he had been in the palace for the past 6 months. Besides, he was only pointing in the direction of the palace, he wasn't lying. The royal family didn't only have one Timothy, Roland Wimbledon was also a member of the royal family. "I understand," he nodded. "But Sylvie and Swineherd are no longer here, can I choose my own men?" "What happened to them?" "They died." Black Hammer said bitterly, "Last winter, they had a conflict with the people from Dreamland Water. They sold poppy flowers and sleeping ferns to the northern part of the city, so Cassus led the others to drive them back. Sylvie's neck was cut, and the blood simply couldn't stop, while Swineherd's canal was filled by them." Theo frowned. This kind of thing was simply ignored by the patrol team. They would even deliberately provoke the rats to bite each other from time to time in order to control their strength and numbers. As for the people who died, no one would care. "That's fine, but you have to remember, it must be someone from the tavern." After leaving the underground trumpeter, Theo took a deep breath. The rotten and damp smell of the tavern made him a little nauseous, until the hot air rushed into his lungs, slightly dispelling this muddy and dull feeling. Although Black Hammer had kindly invited him to wait in the tavern, and even claimed that he would take out the best wine to entertain him, Theo was not willing to stay in a narrow place for too long. If there was an accident, he wouldn't be able to detect it immediately. Next, he decided to go to the inner city and find a reliable inn to book a room for tonight. As for the soldiers of the First Army, they were already very familiar with camping at night, so he didn't need to worry about it. After nightfall, Theo once again returned to the underground trumpeter. At this time, the tavern was already open for business as usual, and from time to time there would be customers coming in and out. He first watched in the dark for a while, and then followed behind a drinker into the room. As a low-end tavern in the outer city, most of the people who came here to drink were civilians, and the drinks were also cheap and inferior ale. 10 copper royals could be used to drink several bowls of it. In the midst of the noise, he quickly found Black Hammer's men. They were sitting around a partition against the wall, and there was a white phalanx on the table. Theo calmly walked over, and immediately someone made way for him. "Good evening, my lord," Silver Ring and Clay Pot nodded in greeting. "Let me introduce these two to you, she is Pinky." Black Hammer patted the tiny girl next to him, then pointed to the young man next to her, Hill Fox, recently joined the Skeleton Fingers. "Fox?" Theo's eyes stopped on the other party's body, and the latter seemed somewhat reserved as he bowed his head in greeting. "In our line of work, there are very few guys with complete surnames," Black Hammer laughed. "He lost everything in gambling, his wife ran away with someone else, even his house was sold, and he had no choice but to join the Black Street. Rest assured, he used to live in the North City, and occasionally visited the underground trumpeter." Silver Ring and Clay Pot were both old acquaintances. Pinky looked no different from an ordinary street kid, but this Hill Fox, Theo felt a little strange. His appearance and expression really did seem like the kind of person who had experienced a drastic change and become mentally and physically exhausted, but his eyes also contained a kind of indescribable thing. It was like... Theo thought for a moment, but in the end he couldn't get an accurate answer. Well, since he lived in the northern district and was an acquaintance of the tavern, it shouldn't be a big problem. Moreover, the first task he had to complete was to transport the fugitives, so there wouldn't be any risk. Listen, it's not complicated. The higher-ups don't want to see the number of fugitives in the eastern region continue to increase, and the food used for relief is decreasing every day. If this continues, sooner or later a riot will occur, and when that time comes, it will be much more difficult to deal with, so we have to find a way to get them out of King's City. What do you need us to do? Black Hammer asked. It's very simple. Spread the news that the western region is being reclaimed and the local lord is willing to accept these fugitives, and that the escorting mercenaries and fleets have already set off, and will arrive at the canal pier in 3 days. What you have to do is to spread this news to those idiots outside the city. You can freely add the specific details, the more real the better. But, if there is no mercenaries and fleets when the time comes, no matter how real it is, it will be useless, Silver Ring said. Of course there will be such things, Theo smiled. Ah. He was startled. Is there really a lord of the western region who wants to accept them? You idiot, Black Hammer slapped him on the back of the head. If you want to act, you naturally have to put on a show. After they are transported to the western region, will they be able to walk back to King's City? As for how to deal with them, let the local lord worry about it. He looked at Theo. It really isn't a difficult task, but as for the reward. Chapter 2:16. For the next 2 days, Theo went back and forth between Marjorie's Chamber of Commerce and the outskirts of King's City. Marjorie would provide the ships to pick up the fugitives, and the First Army would disguise themselves as mercenaries and go to the canal wharf to arrange for the fugitives to board the ships. As for spreading the news and enticing people to take the bait, the Black Hammer was already very familiar with this, so Theo wasn't worried about it. It was much more convenient for the rats to do this than for the outsiders. Although the range was only in the northern city district, the fugitives would certainly spread the news among themselves. Moreover, it was impossible for him to take all the people away at once. His Highness had told him that this matter could be done slowly, sending one ship at a time was one ship at a time. On the day of the fleet's arrival, nearly 1,000 homeless refugees came to the wharf. The effect was beyond Theo's expectations. If he only relied on the First Army to spread the news, it would already be good if there were 100 people who believed it. According to His Highness's screening requirements, he would first let the children board the ships, then the families with children, and finally the adults. As for the elderly, he found that there were almost no gray-haired old people in the crowd. Perhaps they were unwilling to go to such a remote place and risk their lives, or simply unable to escape from the eastern region to King's City. The first fleet of 10 single-masted ships set off after carrying more than 500 people. The rest of the people were driven back to the camp, but they also brought back the news that, the fleet will come again. Originally, he thought that the first task given by His Highness would be completed smoothly, but he didn't expect that shortly after the merchant fleet transported the second group of people, Theo would encounter a thorny problem. A strange disease suddenly appeared in King's City. The first dead man found lying on the side of the road, black spots appeared on his body, his teeth fell off, his skin split open, and the color of the blood flowing out changed. It was as terrible as when a witch was swallowed by the power of the devil. But the dead man wasn't a woman, but a male civilian living in the northern city district. Following that, several more corpses with the same symptoms were found, and some of the people who had been in contact with the corpses began to grow black spots. Regardless of herbs or ice compress, they couldn't subside. Even when they were treated with bloodletting, the blood turned black, as if it was mixed with a lot of ink. Fear soon spread among the people, and the number of people who went to the church to pray increased day by day, but everything was useless. More and more people appeared with black spots. Even the refugees outside the city showed the same symptoms. The high priest of the church stood up. He claimed that this was a conspiracy by the witches. They had released the power of the devil to infect other innocent people. Currently, no treatment method could resist the demonic power, and those who were eroded would die in extreme pain. However, the church would definitely not sit idly by. They had already developed a holy elixir, which was enough to suppress the evil power of the demons from hell. The sermon gave the infected a glimmer of hope. They sat around the entrance of the church every day, waiting for the holy medicine to be distributed. Although Theo was deeply suspicious of the church's claims, but just in case, he temporarily suspended the transport of the fugitives. "Why did you stop?" Black Hammer was extremely puzzled. "Now those guys are also being eroded by the demonic power. If we don't send them away, are we going to let them stay outside the city to be the witches' seeds?" "This is what the higher-ups want," he said impatiently. "It's fine if it's just ordinary refugees, but if the western region is also infected by this evil force, what will become of the kingdom?" Black Hammer paused for a moment. "But what will become of the western region is none of our business. Sir Theo, why don't you just pretend that you didn't hear what the higher-ups want, and drag them all away? Think about it, this kind of evil thing is very likely to be eroded as soon as you come into contact with it. I don't want to stay together with a bunch of demons from hell, even if it's separated by a wall. Pretend that I didn't hear it." "I only have one head," Theo said coldly. "You also only have one head. Just do as I say." After leaving the tavern, he found a shop marked with the emblem of Marjorie's caravan, and showed his token. "I want to see your boss, the sooner the better." It didn't take long before he saw the female merchant again in the secret room of the shop. "This disease certainly has nothing to do with the witches," Marjorie said. "If the released demonic power couldn't even be resisted by the god's stone of retaliation, then they would have already turned the Hermes into a land of death. I also think so, but the most urgent task is to report this matter to His Royal Highness Roland." Although the two groups of people who boarded the ship didn't show any symptoms of the black spot, it seems that this disease didn't break out on the spot. If someone on the ship is infected with the demonic power, Border Town must immediately respond. Theo took out a folded letter from his bosom. "I need your help to send this letter back to His Royal Highness as soon as possible." "Of course," she nodded. Merchants always pass messages the fastest. After several days of sailing, Lucia felt like vomiting. For the past month, she seemed to have been constantly on the run, fleeing from the eastern region to King's City, and then from King's City to the western region. However, the former was driven out of her home, while the latter was the last hope in her heart. "Sister, water, I'm thirsty," Belle let out a painful cry, reaching out and grabbing her arm. "Okay, I'll go get you some water." Lucia grabbed the bag at hand and staggered out of the cabin. Lying on the lowest side of the ship, she reached out and dipped the bag into the river. The acid in her stomach bubbled up again, and she couldn't hold it in any longer, finally vomiting it out. The small amount of oatmeal in her stomach was completely vomited out, and acid water flowed out of her nostrils. She resisted the urge to burst into tears, clenched her teeth, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and continued to soak the bag. When the bag had absorbed enough water, she held it in her bosom and quickly ran back to the cabin. "Water is coming, open your mouth." But Belle's complexion was even worse than before, her cheeks were abnormally red, and her forehead was terribly hot. She closed her lips and let out intermittent sounds. Lucia had to forcibly open her mouth and twist the bag tightly, letting the water drip into her sister's mouth. "Don't get too close to her, the black spot has already spread to her neck, she won't be able to hold on for long." A middle-aged man with a weak breath in the cabin said, "We will all die here, you'd better take care of yourself." Not long after leaving King's City, some people on the ship contracted a terrible disease. First, they had a fever, then black spots appeared on their skin, and the disease would rapidly worsen after 3 or 4 days. Not only would they fall into a coma, but they would also infect others with the same disease. Therefore, on the 5th day, the fleet specially cleared out a sailboat to carry the sick people. Lucia guessed that the reason why the other side didn't throw all the sick fugitives into the river was that some of their own people were also infected. After the black spots appeared on Belle's body, she didn't listen to others' advice and resolutely followed her sister to this ship full of sick people. In order to take care of the young Belle, she almost didn't sleep for 2 days. Lucia still didn't give up. She believed that as long as they reached the western region, everything would get better. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.